Chapter 2740, 2740 Lotus Life Finger. 2740 Lotus Life Finger. Jin Shun and the others shook their heads instinctively, and their gazes towards Su Zimo gradually changed. This person was fine after drinking a bowl of sword chi water. Jin Shun had a stomach full of accusations and questions. At that moment, he could not say a single word and lost his temper instantly. Right then, in the sword-cleansing pool, Baiming Shui seemed to be unable to withstand it and let out a muffled groan. Her face was pale and she had a pained expression, looking extremely weak and pitiful. When Jin Shun and the others saw that, their hearts ached. Baiming Shui looked at Su Zimo instinctively and panted slightly, a questioning look in her eyes. Indeed, she could barely hang on any longer. Su Zimo shook his head gently, still not allowing her to come out. In reality, Su Zimo's spirit consciousness and attention had been on Baiming Shui the entire time, paying attention to her physical condition. Baiming Shui had yet to reach her limits. In the sword-cleansing pool, Baiming Shui gritted her teeth. Her bloodied body trembled slightly, and even her life force was flowing away. Only the sharpness in her eyes did not diminish and her gaze was firm without any hesitation. That was Baiming Shui's will. Back in Baiming Town, nobody could make this 15-year-old girl submit even when her dantian was shattered. The sword cultivators frowned. Even Chu Xian revealed a hint of pity. Jian Shun could no longer hold it in and said in a deep voice, "Fellow Taoist Su, just because you can withstand the sword chi of the sword-cleansing pool doesn't mean that junior sister Baiming can as well. Her cultivation realm is only equivalent to a grade 9 heaven immortal, but you're already a perfected immortal. That's right. If anything happens to senior sister Baiming, can you bear the responsibility?" Many sword cultivators went forward and berated once more. Su Zimo had a calm expression and was unmoved. Right then, Baiming Shui seemed like she could not hold on any longer. Her body went limp and her eyes closed. She fainted on the spot and gradually sank into the bottom of the sword-cleansing pool. "Ah!" Many sword cultivators exclaimed and moved one after another, wanting to save Baiming Shui. Right then, a figure swept past the sword-cleansing pool and waved his wide robes, sweeping up the injured Baiming Shui and speeding into the distance. The figure was way too fast. By the time everyone arrived above the sword-cleansing pool, the figure had already left with Baiming Shui and vanished. Only Jin Shun and the others could vaguely see that the person who made a move earlier on was Baiming Shui's master, fellow Taoist Su. Junior sister Baiming is so severely injured. Will anything happen to her? "I don't think so," Jin Shun said in a deep voice. Junior sister Baiming's physique and bloodline are extremely strong. She should be able to recover after cultivating for a year and a half. "That's good." Chu Xian was a little angry. "Seriously, what's with fellow Taoist Su? How can anyone cultivate like that? No matter how strong her physique is, she won't be able to withstand such torture." Jin Shin said, "Junior sister Baiming's injury this time round might not be a bad thing. We'll let her recuperate for a period of time before discussing how to deal with this matter." 3 days later, Jin Shan and the others were still in seclusion in their cave abodes when they heard a commotion outside. "What happened?" Jin Shan went out hurriedly to ask. "Senior brother Jin Shun, bad news." A sword cultivator panted and said, "Senior sister Baiming went to the sword-cleansing pool to cultivate again." "What?" Jin Shan was shocked and said hurriedly, "Junior sister Baiming was severely injured 3 days ago. Now that she's gone to the sword-cleansing pool again, does she want to die?" At the mention of that, a strange expression appeared on the sword cultivator's face. He stammered and hesitated. As Jin Shun sped in the direction of the sword-cleansing pool, he berated, "Speak if you have anything to say. Why are you hesitating?" The sword cultivator coughed gently. "Senior sister Baiming's injuries from 3 days ago have already healed." "Huh?" Jin Shin staggered and asked in disbelief with widened eyes, "She recovered from such serious injuries in 3 days? How is that possible?" The sword cultivator smiled bitterly. "I'm not sure either. The other perfected immortal senior brothers find it unbelievable as well." Jin Shun was puzzled. Even if all the elixirs and pills of the sword world were piled on Bai Ming-shui, she would not be able to recover from such serious injuries in 3 days, right? Although Bai Ming-shui's physique and bloodline were strong, they were not that strong. What the hell? Suddenly, a green-robed figure flashed through Jian Chen's mind. Could it be related to him? Jian Chen shook his head again and thought to himself, he's a perfected immortal. Even if he's skilled in the medical Tao, he can't heal junior sister Bai Ming in 3 days. In reality, Su Zimo was indeed the one who healed Bai Ming-shui's injuries. After his creation Green Lotus true body entered grade 12, his bloodline nurtured a large amount of life force. In the Yin-Yang Talisman Sutra, Su Zimo comprehended a healing secret skill, Lotus Life Finger, which could be used with his Green Lotus bloodline. In the Tao of Yin and Yang, Yin ruled over killing and Yang ruled over life. The Lotus Life Finger could use a secret skill to seal the immense life force nurtured by the Green Lotus bloodline into Bai Ming-shui's flesh. To a certain extent, Bai Ming-shui received the nourishment of the grade 12 creation Green Lotus bloodline, and her injuries healed extremely quickly. She recovered to her original state in 3 days. Su Zimo naturally had a backup plan for Bai Ming-shui to cultivate in this manner. This time round, Su Zimo did not follow Bai Ming-shui to the sword cleansing pool. Instead, he stayed in Bai Ming-shui's cave abode to remove the remaining power of the 2 curses in his body. Beside the sword cleansing pool, Jian Chen and the others finally arrived and persuaded Bai Ming-shui, but the latter turned a deaf ear. It was only when she cultivated until she was covered in injuries and could barely breathe that Bai Ming-shui staggered out of the sword cleansing pool and forced herself to return to her cave abode before fainting. Su Zimo helped her up and used the Lotus Life Finger to heal her injuries and cleanse her bloodline once more. The destruction, repair, and repair of the physique could allow Bai Ming-shui's physique and bloodline to grow and transform at the fastest speed with the combination of the secret skill. 3 days later, Bai Ming-shui recovered and entered the sword cleansing pool to cultivate again. This went on and on. Every 3 days, Bai Ming-shui would spend more time cultivating in the sword cleansing pool. A month later, the violent sword qi in the sword cleansing pool alone could no longer cause any damage to Bai Ming-shui's body. She could cultivate in the sword cleansing pool for an entire day without any injuries. Bai Ming-shui's cultivation realm still did not improve at all, and there was no change in her appearance. However, in reality, her body and bloodline were undergoing a tremendous transformation. Even if others knew about this cultivation method, they would not be able to imitate it. Firstly, it had an extremely strong requirement on the will of cultivators. Secondly, this required a cultivator with the bloodline of the grade 12 creation Green Lotus to help the other party without hesitation at the cost of expending a large amount of his essence blood. Of course, none of the sword cultivators thought much of that. Junior sister Bai Ming was pure and beautiful like a fairy. Why would such a peerless beauty want to suffer such cruel torture? Furthermore, wasn't she still stuck in her cultivation realm even after cultivating the martial Tao for so long? As time passed, not only did this matter cause quite a commotion on Carnage Sword Peak, it even alarmed the sword cultivators of the other 7 sword peaks. Chapter 2741, 2741 Challenge, 2741 Challenge. The sword cleansing pool at the foot of Carnage Sword Peak no longer caused much damage to Bai Ming-shui. However, on this day, Bai Ming-shui changed her method and cultivated beneath the sword qi waterfall of Carnage Sword Peak. This was much more dangerous than cultivating in the sword cleansing pool. Carnage Sword Peak towered into the clouds, and the sword qi waterfall that fell from the peak was extremely lethal. On the first day that Bai Ming-shui headed to the bottom of the sword qi waterfall, she was severely injured by the sword qi waterfall and fainted in the sword cleansing pool again before she could last for even half an hour. It was Su Zimo who appeared in time again and brought Bai Ming-shui back to her cave abode. Sigh, junior sister Bai Ming must be out of her mind. Cultivating the Tao is not a rush to success to begin with. How can anyone torture themselves like junior sister Bai Ming? There's no way junior sister Bai Ming could have thought of such an inhuman cultivation method. That Su fellow must have forced her. The sword cultivators of Carnage Sword Peak were indignant and felt even more disgusted and conflicted towards Su Zimo's existence. Meeting Hall of Carnage Sword Peak. This is too ridiculous. A perfected one-realm sword cultivator stood out and complained. Ever since that Su fellow came to our sword world, how much has junior sister Biming been tortured by him? That Su fellow said that he's here to visit the sword world. However, for the past month or so, he's mostly hiding in junior sister Biming's cave abode and rarely appears. I think he's afraid of people from our sword world. Peak Master thinks highly of junior sister Biming. What did he say? In the meeting hall, many sword cultivators gathered and discussed spiritedly. Many of them looked at Wang Dong, who was sitting in the middle and was also the number one of Carnage Sword Peak. Wang Dong said, Master is naturally concerned about this as well. However, he's not only the Peak Master of our Carnage Sword Peak, he's also a Grotto Heaven realm expert. Given his status and realm, it's not appropriate for him to interfere in this matter. We have to think of a way to resolve this matter ourselves. Wang Dong had always liked Biming Shui. However, he had never expressed it publicly. Over the past few days, his heart ached when he saw Biming Shui suffer. However, he was the number one of Carnage Sword Peak after all, and was already at the Paradise Void Perfected One realm. He could be considered a Peak Perfected Immortal. If he went to look for Su Zimo, it would be considered bullying the weak. In the sword world, the most important thing was fairness. Unless there were extremely special circumstances, it was tacitly agreed that only cultivators of the same cultivation realm could spar in the sword world. If someone relied on the fact that their cultivation realm was higher than the other parties, even if they won, they would not win the respect of sword cultivators and would even attract criticism and ridicule. For example, Su Zimo was now a Convergence Perfected Immortal. In the sword world, only Convergence Perfected Immortals could spar with him. Even if someone was only a single realm above him at the Celestial Being realm, it would be an unfair win in the eyes of many sword cultivators. Senior Brother Wang, think of a way. A sword cultivator said, if this continues, junior sister Biming will probably be crippled by that Su fellow. That's right. Even the Peak Master praised junior sister Biming's talent in the sword Dao. How can we let her be destroyed in that person's hands? Wang Dong pondered for a long time, and a sword glint flashed through his eyes, as though he had made up his mind. Seems like that's the only way. Our Carnage Sword Peak will choose the strongest Convergence Perfected Immortal to spar with fellow Taoist Su. If we can defeat him, we'll take the opportunity to persuade him to back off. Fellow Taoist Su will probably be too embarrassed to be junior sister Biming's master, as long as he loses in front of everyone. Chu Xin nodded. That's right. If he can't even defeat us, he's not worthy of being junior sister Biming's master. I'll do it. Chu Xin was the first to stand out. No matter what, fellow Taoist Su was brought back by us. I'm responsible for this. You. Wang Dong pondered in silence and hesitated. Chu Xin was a Convergence Perfected Immortal. However, her combat strength could only be considered top tier at this level and was not the strongest. Wang Dong said slowly, this battle is extremely important. We have to guarantee victory. On the one hand, it's to save junior sister Biming from danger. On the other hand, we can't weaken the reputation of our sword world. Let me do it. Right then, a sword cultivator stood out and said indifferently. Niechun. He was one of the most famous paragons of Carnage Sword Peak. Among the ordinary disciples, only Biming Shui had ever defeated him. When he underwent the Tribulation Transcendence and ascended, he attracted the 7 of 9 heavenly tribulation. When Wang Dong saw Niechun stand out, he was relieved and nodded. With junior brother Nya around, there's no doubt about the outcome of this battle. However, there are some things I should remind you. Wang Dong thought for a moment before saying, I have a feeling that this person might have some powerful trump cards. Junior brother Nya, don't be careless when fighting him. Don't worry, senior brother. Niechun said, if I attack, I'll give it my all no matter who my opponent is. I don't underestimate my opponents. Wang Dong smiled again. However, junior brother Nya, you have to know your limits as well. After all, The other party is a guest from afar and was once junior sister Biming's master. If you can win easily, you have to stop after merely teaching him a lesson. Don't be rude. Nietchen pouted. I won't harm his life. When the time comes, I'll teach him a lesson that'll be etched in his bones. That's good. Wang Dong was relieved and said with a smile, I won't go over, lest fellow Taoist Su feels too much pressure. I'll prepare some good wine and wait for you to return victorious, junior brother Nye. Nietchen raised his head slightly and said proudly, Senior brother, you have to prepare quickly. I'll be back soon. When the other sword cultivators heard that, they cheered as well and sped towards Biming Shui's cave abode with Nietchen. Before long, Nietchen and the others arrived before Biming Shui's cave abode. Along the way, it naturally attracted many sword cultivators to watch the battle and caused a huge commotion. When they arrived at the cave abode, more than half of the sword cultivators of Carnage Sword Peak were attracted over. Apart from some sword-ranking battles arranged by the Sword World, it had been a long time since Carnage Sword Peak was so lively. Before Nietchen could shout, a sword cultivator could no longer hold it in and went forward to knock. Su Zimo was healing Biming Shui in his cave abode and could not help but frown when he sensed the commotion outside. What's going on outside? Biming Shui had just started healing, and her essence spirit was weak. She could not detect the situation outside and asked softly, Wait a moment. I'll go out and take a look. In a flash, Su Zimo arrived in front of the cave abode and pushed the door open. When they saw Su Zimo walk out, the commotion outside the door quietened down. In the past month, Su Zimo used the Hell Boundless Springs and had already purged the 2 curses in his body, recovering to his original state. Why are you guys here? Su Zimo asked. Nietchen carried a sword in his arms and walked towards Su Zimo slowly, saying, Fellow Taoist, I heard that you're from the heavenly world. I'm Nietchen, a convergence-perfected immortal. I'd like to spar with you. Chapter 2742, 2742 3 Free Moves. 2742 3 Free Moves. You want to spar with me? Su Zimo looked at the naive sword cultivator named Nietchen opposite him and wondered if this person had gotten the wrong guy. However, on second thought, the distance between the heavenly world and the sword world was too far. The people of the sword world did not know who he was at all, let alone what methods he had. It was understandable for this person to come and spar. However, for the current Su Zimo, his grade 12 green Lotus true body had already grown to its peak after entering the perfected One realm. Even without using his bloodline, divine powers, or secret skills, he could crush all convergence-perfected immortals with his green Lotus true body alone. Biming Shui was still in the cave abode, waiting for him to return to heal her. Furthermore, a large amount of energy from the Emperor's tomb was accumulated in his body. After removing the 2 curses, he was prepared to refine and absorb the energy to break through to the celestial being realm. To think that Nietchen would come knocking at this moment. When Jianshun saw that Su Zimo was silent, he thought that Su Zimo was worried. Therefore, he went forward and said, Fellow Taoist Su, you've been in the sword world for a period of time. When my junior brother heard that you're from the heavenly world, he was interested in seeing your methods. Fellow Taoist Su, don't worry. Junior brother Nietchen will know his limits. Sure. Su Zimo nodded. He only wanted to end things quickly and return to his cave abode to heal Biming Shui before continuing his cultivation. This Nietchen was not even considered a challenge to him. He had a good impression of the sword world. It was not appropriate for him to reject a visit from someone to spar. Furthermore, the sword world had always treated him with respect. Even this person who came to challenge him was merely a convergence-perfected one-realm sword cultivator. When Jianshun saw Su Zimo agree immediately, he was stunned and surprised. The commotion here attracted more than half of the sword cultivators of Carnage Sword Peak, and they gathered together. More and more people gathered in the area with excited expressions. Nietchen took a step forward with a calm expression. Fellow Taoist Su, you're a guest from afar after all. You can attack first. I'll let you have 3 free moves. At that point, cheers sounded from the crowd. Nietchen took the initiative to give up the initiative and let the other party attack. In the eyes of many sword cultivators, giving Su Zimo 3 moves was already enough respect. You want me to attack first? Su Zimo had a strange expression. Nietchen nodded slightly. You can attack as much as you want. I won't retaliate within 3 moves. However, you have to be careful after 3 moves. Su Zimo smiled and nodded. Jian Shan took a deep breath and declared, The 2 of you, get ready, begin. The moment he said that, Su Zimo's figure flashed, and he arrived before Nietchen in an instant at an astonishing speed. Nietchen was shocked. He was so fast. As he had just said that he wanted to give the other party 3 moves, Nietchen could not retaliate and could only retreat instinctively. Su Zimo reached out and grabbed the sword in Nietchen's arms. Before Nietchen could react, Su Zimo's palm had already grabbed the hilt of the sword. Buzz! A resplendent sword light flashed accompanied by a clear sword hum. The many sword cultivators watching only felt a flash of light that disappeared instantly. The next moment, Su Zimo had already returned to his original spot, as though he had never moved. The moment the 2 of them made contact, it was so fast that many sword cultivators did not manage to see clearly what happened in between. Su Zimo had a calm expression. As for Nietchen, his expression was a little ugly and he remained silent. What happened just now? I'm not sure. I don't think that's 3 moves, right? Why aren't they fighting anymore? That sword light earlier on. Did senior brother Nietchen fail to control himself and attack in advance? As the sword cultivators discussed, a trace of blood gradually seeped out from Nietchen's glabella. An eye-catching drop of scarlet blood flowed down slowly and trickled from his nose. The discussions around them gradually stopped. In that split second earlier on, Nietchen was actually injured. Apart from Nietchen and Su Zimo, not many people could see clearly what happened earlier on. Su Zimo closed in and pulled out the sword in Nietchen's arms right in front of him. He pierced Nietchen's glabella with it and returned his sword to its sheath. Nietchen knew very well that Su Zimo had 100 ways to kill him after that series of actions. As for him, he could not dodge at all. The difference was way too great. If the other party were to attack, he would not even have the chance to draw his sword. Nietchen took a deep breath of air with a grim expression and said in a deep voice, Fellow Taoist Su, I have to admit that I won't be able to defeat you if you attack first. Su Zimo smiled gently. This sword cultivator was rather straightforward and did not fly into a rage out of humiliation. Instead, he admitted that he had already been defeated. Nietchen said, However, my methods are all based on this sword. I want to challenge you again and won't give in anymore. Fellow Taoist, please fulfill my wish. This time round, Nietchen put away the arrogance in his heart completely and did not dare to be negligent at all. Sure. Su Zimo nodded casually. Buzz. This time round, Nietchen pulled out his sword immediately and placed it horizontally in front of his chest. His body exuded the killing intent of the sword Dao. Nietchen had already treated Su Zimo as the strongest opponent in his life and did not dare to hold back at all. There were still no unnecessary movements from Su Zimo. As though he was taking a leisurely stroll, he took a step forward and arrived before Nietchen instantly. Although the footwork seemed casual, it was actually a combination of the dermic Dao profundities of the 9 palace subtle steps and plow heaven stride. Not only did he cross the void instantly, he even released an aura of invincibility that was soul-stirring. Even celestial being perfected immortals might not be able to seize the initiative, let alone a convergence-perfected immortal. Su Zimo attacked and grabbed the sword in Nietchen's hand. Nietchen channeled his Dao fruit crazily and balls of dermic Dao halos bloomed behind his head. The sword in his hand spun and released an extremely sharp sword momentum. However, Su Zimo was even faster. Before Nietchen could release all his sword momentum, Su Zimo grabbed his wrist and squeezed gently. Nietchen was in pain and released his grip. The sword had already landed in Su Zimo's hand. Su Zimo turned the sword and sword light flashed before disappearing instantly. His figure had already retreated to his original spot. The two of them were still standing 100 feet apart. Nietchen held a long sword in his arms, as though nothing had happened. However, there was another blood scar on his glabella. If that sword went any deeper, he would have died on the spot. I've lost. After a long silence, Nietchen said slowly. Thereafter, he cupped his fists towards Su Zimo and turned to leave silently. A sigh sounded from the surrounding crowd. A look of pity flashed through Jian Chen's eyes as well. To think that Nietchen, a convergence-perfected immortal of Carnage Sword Peak, could not defeat this person as well. Furthermore, the technique that this person had just revealed was indeed terrifying. Not only was his movement technique extremely fast, his physique was also powerful. He could actually defeat Nietchen, who held a sword with his bare hands. Jianchen wondered if he could win confidently if he was the one up against Su Zimo. Chapter 2743, 2743 Complete Defeat. 2743 Complete Defeat. In the meeting hall, Wang Dong prepared the wine and waited for Nietchen to return victorious. In his opinion, there should not be any accidents in this battle. When Nietchen condensed his Tao fruit and entered the perfected One realm, he attracted the 7 of 9 heavenly tribulation. This was rare in the sword world as well. Furthermore, Nietchen's combat strength was ranked in the top 5 among the Convergence Realm sword cultivators of Carnage Sword Peak. Indeed, before long, Nietchen appeared at the entrance of the meeting hall. Wang Dong welcomed him with a smile and praised, "It hasn't even been 5 minutes. Junior brother Nie, you're indeed fast." When Nietchen heard that, the corners of his mouth twitched uncontrollably. When Wang Dong saw that Nietchen's expression was not right and he was a little depressed, he could not help but frown slightly. He focused his gaze and realized that there were 2 fine sword marks on Nietchen's glabella. Although the wounds had already healed, faint traces of them could still be seen. "You lost, junior brother Nie?" Wang Dong probed. Nietchen sighed. "This cultivator from the heavenly world does have some skills. I can't defeat him." Wang Dong consoled, "It's fine. Junior brother Nie, don't be discouraged. All cultivators of our generation have been defeated before." Nietchen smiled bitterly. In reality, it would be fine if he was merely defeated. However, he was truly defeated too thoroughly. The other party did not even use a weapon, but he could not even last a single round. This was a huge blow to him. When Wang Dong saw that Nietchen was dispirited, he encouraged, "Junior brother Nie, don't be so hard on yourself. The sword Tao of the sword cultivators of Carnage Sword Peak is meant to kill. He's a guest from afar. It's understandable that you lost because you restrained yourself so as to not unleash the true strength of the Carnage Sword Tao. I think things might be different in a life and death battle." Nietchen opened his mouth slightly and wanted to say something but hesitated. It was not that he could not unleash his full strength, but Su Zimo did not give him the chance at all. If it was a life and death battle earlier on, he would have died countless times. The two of them did not manage to chat for long when a sword cultivator suddenly ran over in a hurry from outside and panted, "Senior brother Wang." After senior brother Nie was defeated, Chu Xian and the other senior brothers and sisters could not stand it anymore and stood out to challenge that person. Preposterous. Wang Dong berated. If they wanted to spar, they naturally have to do it in a fair environment. Junior brother Nie has already sparred with him today. No matter what, they should give him a day to rest before going at it again. Even if they defeat him because they took turns to wear him down, it'll be unethical. If word gets out, people will even say that our sword world bullied outsiders. The sword cultivator had an embarrassed expression and stammered softly, "It's not certain who's bullying who. What are you muttering about?" Wang Dong frowned. "Hurry back and stop junior sister Chu Xian and the others. The other party is junior sister Baiming's master in name. Don't be rude. We can't take turns fighting." The sword cultivator had an awkward expression. "Senior brother Wang, it's too late for you to say that. Everything was already over by the time I rushed over." "It's over?" Wang Dong was a little exasperated and asked, "Did you hurt fellow Daoist Su?" The corners of Nie Chen's mouth twitched a few more times. The sword cultivator could not help but roll his eyes. Senior Brother Wang, you might not know this Su fellow's methods yet. Senior Sister Chu Xian and more than 10 other sword cultivators went forward but were defeated by him in less than a round. Wang Dong raised his eyebrows. Junior Sister Chu Xian and more than 10 sword cultivators challenged this person one after another and were all defeated. Wang Dong looked at Niechan instinctively. Niechan coughed gently. I forgot to mention earlier on that I couldn't even last a single round against that person. Is he that strong? The scene of his first encounter with Su Zimo appeared in Wang Dong's mind. He did not seem to feel any threat from the other party. Wang Dong pondered for a moment and asked, did this person make use of some powerful spirit treasure? Niechan said, when he fought me, he snatched the sword in my hands right in front of me with his bare hands and injured me. Twice. He snatched away the sword of a sword cultivator with his bare hands. Wang Dong nodded to himself. It seemed like this person was indeed capable. Wang Dong asked again, what divine powers or secret skills did he use? Nothing. The sword cultivator shook his head. What do you mean? Wang Dong did not understand and asked instinctively, didn't you guys see the origin of the divine powers or secret skills he released? The sword cultivator replied honestly, he didn't release any divine powers or secret skills. Wang Dong was stunned and could not react for a moment. There were no divine powers or secret skills released in the fight between perfected immortals. The sword cultivator said, that person relied on straightforward punches and kicks to defeat Senior Sister Chu Xian and the others. Right then, another sword cultivator sped over from outside. The moment he entered the hall, the sword cultivator shouted, Senior Brother Wang, that person has already defeated more than 40 sword cultivators in succession in front of Junior Sister Baiming's cave abode. Wang Dong's heart skipped a beat and his breathing became a little unstable. He had just defeated Chu Xian and more than 10 other sword cultivators. Not much time had passed, and he defeated another 20-odd sword cultivators. It was already embarrassing enough to take turns fighting him. However, if they suffered such thorough defeats despite taking turns to fight him, the reputation of Carnage Sword Peak in the sword world would be completely destroyed. At that moment, Wang Dong could not care less. No matter what, Su Zimo came from the heavenly world. As sword cultivators of the sword world, they naturally could not show weakness. Wang Dong said in a deep voice, call Junior Brother Bu Yao and Junior Brother Wenzheng to see me. Senior Brother Bu Yao and Senior Brother Wenzheng have already rushed over when they heard about this, the sword cultivator said hurriedly. Wang Dong heaved a sigh of relief and nodded slightly. That's good. Niechan and the other sword cultivators exchanged glances, feeling uneasy. They had witnessed Su Zimo's methods and truly experienced that invincible might. Although Bu Yao and Wenzheng were top experts among Convergence perfected immortals on Carnage Sword Peak, it was difficult to say who would win against this person. Wang Dong seemed to be unable to sit still either. He took a deep breath and said, let's go. I'll go take a look and see how capable this person is. I'll hold the fort for junior brothers Bu Yao and Wenzheng. Before Wang Dong and the others could walk out of the meeting hall, another sword cultivator rushed over from afar. Wang Dong's heart sank when he saw this person's flustered expression. Senior Brother Wang, bad news? When the sword cultivator saw Wang Dong, he shouted. Senior brothers Bu Yao and Wenzheng were knocked out by 2 slaps from that person and did not even manage to draw their swords. That news was like a shocking bolt of lightning that struck Wang Dong until he felt a little dizzy. Wasn't Bu Yao and Wenzheng defeated too quickly? As sword cultivators, they did not even manage to draw their swords. If word got out, they would probably become the greatest joke of the 8 sword peaks. Chapter 2744, 2744-5 Prodigies, 2744-5 Prodigies. The challenge of Carnage Sword Peak to Su Zimo did not last long. It ended in less than 2 hours. After Bu Yao and Wenzheng, 2 Convergence perfected immortals, were defeated one after another, no one from Carnage Sword Peak stood out anymore. There were more than 1,000 perfected immortals on Carnage Sword Peak. Among them, there were more than 500 Convergence perfected immortals. However, even Bu Yao and Wen Zhang were defeated miserably by Su Zimo without even drawing their swords. If the other sword cultivators went forward to challenge him, they would only be asking for humiliation. Su Zimo wanted to end the combat as soon as possible and return to his cave abode to heal Baiming Shui. Therefore, he did not delay the entanglement with the other party. However, this matter caused a huge commotion among the 8 sword peaks. Have you heard? Baiming Shui's master from the lower worlds ran to Carnage Sword Peak and defeated 49 sword cultivators of Carnage Sword Peak within 2 hours. He's so strong? What's his cultivation? I heard that he's a Convergence perfected immortal. His cultivation realm isn't high either. How can he be Junior Sister Baiming's master? That's the conflict. I heard that this person's method of training Junior Sister Baiming was way too cruel. The fellow disciples of Carnage Sword Peak could not stand it and wanted to teach him a lesson. To think that they would be taught a lesson instead. 5 Elements Sword Peak, one of the 8 sword peaks. On this day, a few perfected immortals sat together in the Hall of 5 Elements Sword Peak and chatted casually as they sipped their tea. Carnage Sword Peak has lost a lot of face this time round. The sword cultivator in the middle shook his head gently and lamented. This person named Gong Suinyu was the #1 legacy disciple of 5 Elements Sword Peak. The person on the left had a sharp gaze. How powerful was Carnage Sword Peak back then? It was the leader of the 8 sword peaks. To think that it would fall to such a state now. They lost even after they took turns to fight him. His Taoist title was Tai Lai, and he came from Extreme Sword Peak. He was also the #1 legacy disciple of Extreme Sword Peak. In the palm of the sword cultivator on the right, long swords flashed one after another, seemingly real and illusory. He continued, the reason why Carnage Sword Peak could become the leader of the 8 sword peaks back then was also because of the existence of Emperor Immortal Vanquishing. Back when he created the 3 great sword arts and the Carnage Sword Tao, he established the 8th sword peak in the sword world, which is the current Carnage Sword Peak that's famous in the heavenly world. This person was called Shan Yu and came from Illusory Sword Peak. It's a pity that Emperor Immortal Vanquishing is dead. Although the 3 great sword arts have been passed down, they lack his divine might. Another sword cultivator sighed. The sword cultivator was a monk with a string of prayer beads in his hands. His name was Zhu Jian, and he came from Zen Sword Peak. A tall and burly man with a domineering aura rumbled. That's right. After so many years, no one has been able to cultivate that peerless divine power, the immortal vanquishing sword. Because of Junior Sister Baiming's appearance, many seniors of Carnage Sword Peak pinned their hopes on her. Unfortunately, she cultivated incorrectly and could not condense a Tao fruit to enter the perfected one realm, much less cultivate the immortal vanquishing sword. The burly man's name was Qin Zhong, and he wore bronze armor. He carried a thick and heavy gigantic sword on his back and came from Tyrant Sword Peak. The 5 people present were all peak perfected immortals of the various sword peaks. Now that they were gathered, they naturally heard the news from Carnage Sword Peak. Gong Suinyu of 5 Elements Sword Peak looked at Sword Immortal Tai Lai and said with a smile, from the looks of it, the person with the highest chance of cultivating the peerless divine power, the immortal vanquishing sword, might be a junior brother from Extreme Sword Peak instead. Sword Immortal Tai Lai nodded. Although this person came from the heavenly world, his talent in the Sword Tao is indeed extremely strong and rare. Furthermore, he has obtained many Sword Tao inheritances. When he entered the perfected one realm, he attracted the 8 of 9 heavenly tribulation. Master praised him greatly and even personally said that he's the person with the highest chance of comprehending the immortal vanquishing sword. Qin Zhong shouted, no matter what, Carnage Sword Peak is one of the 8 sword peaks. It won't look good for us if they lose face. Furthermore, Junior Sister Baiming is so talented in the Sword Tao. We can't let that person ruin her. Monk Zhu Jian nodded as well. Master mentioned this to me. He was more worried about Junior Sister Baiming but couldn't appear personally, so he asked me to think of a way. Monk Zhu Jian's master was the peak master of Zen Sword Peak. The others exchanged glances with tacit understanding. In reality, not only did the situation on Baiming Shui's side attract their attention, Even the peak masters of the 8 sword peaks were paying attention silently. However, the 8 peak masters were all peak Grotto Heaven Realm sword immortals. Naturally, it was not appropriate for them to appear against a mere perfected immortal from the heavenly world. Everyone, what should we do about this? Gong Suinyu asked. Xin Yu of Illusory Sword Peak said, that's simple. Let's each choose a strongest convergence perfected immortal to challenge him. No matter how strong that person is, can he defeat all the monster incarnates of our 8 sword peaks? All right. Gong Suinyu nodded slightly. Among the convergence perfected immortals of 5 elements sword peak, there's indeed someone who is stronger than Bu Yao and Wanzhong. Qin Zhong looked at sword immortal Tai Lai and asked, is that person from your extreme sword peak free? If he attacks, that person will definitely lose. Sword immortal Tai Lai smiled. Junior brother Yun is still in seclusion. There's no need for him to appear for such a small matter. The sword immortals chatted for a while more before returning. The next day, meeting hall of Carnage Sword Peak. Gong Suinyu of 5 Elements Sword Peak, Sword Immortal Tai Lai of the Supreme Sword Peak, Xin Yu of Illusory Sword Peak, Monk Zhu Jian of Zen Sword Peak, and Qin Zhong of Tyrant Sword Peak arrived at the same time. When Wang Dong saw them appear, he knew why. To think that the matter of Carnage Sword Peak would alarm the few of you? Wang Dong welcomed them and invited the 5 of them into the hall. He smiled bitterly. I'm ashamed. Gong Suinyu smiled. Brother Wang, there's no need for that. The sword cultivators of the 8 sword peaks are all disciples of the same lineage. Naturally, we can't stand by and do nothing when Carnage Sword Peak encounters trouble. Qin Zhong burst into laughter. It's mainly because he can't bear to see Sister Baiming's sword Dao talent destroyed by that person. As a convergence perfected immortal, how incredible can he be? I can teach him a lesson and let him know that there's always someone better. Wang Dong hesitated for a moment. Fellow Taoists, you might not know yet. This person is indeed capable. Brother Wang, don't worry. Xin Yu smiled. The convergence perfected immortals chosen by the 5 peaks this time round have never tasted defeat among their peers. Their combat strength is at the top and there won't be any accidents. Monk Zhu Jian nodded slightly as well. With these 5 sword cultivators, no matter how amazing that person's cultivation is, he won't be able to get through the 5 of them in a row. When Wang Dong saw how confident the 5 of them were, he could not help but worry and mutter to himself, back then, I was as confident as you guys. Gong Suinyu said, Brother Wang, let's rest here for a while and enjoy this fragrant tea. We'll just wait for the good news from here. The moment he said that, a figure sped over from outside. It's here. Sword Immortal Tai Lai's eyes lit up as he smiled. To think that it's even faster than we imagined. He probably didn't even manage to defeat a single one of the 5 sword cultivator paragons. In the blink of an eye, the sword cultivator charged into the hall. The shock on his face had yet to dissipate as he panted. Senior Brother Wang, the 5 senior brothers of the other sword peaks have all been knocked unconscious by that person. Wang Dong shrugged slightly, not surprised. Well, Gong Suinyu, Sword Immortal Tai Lai, and the others froze on the spot. Chapter 2745, 2745 Inheritance Sword Art. 2745 Inheritance Sword Art. After dealing with the 5 sword cultivators who had just arrived to challenge him, Su Zimo returned to his cave abode. Baiming Shui had just woken up from her cultivation as well. There are people disturbing you again, Master? Baiming Shui frowned slightly. Su Zimo smiled. I heard that they are paragons of the other sword peaks. To think that I would cause such a huge commotion in the sword world while imparting the martial Tao to you. Over the past few days, Su Zimo gradually understood. The reason why this group of sword cultivators came to challenge him was because they could not stand him imparting the Tao to Baiming Shui and could not bear to see her suffer cruel torture. Master, I'm sorry, Baiming Shui said. I'll look for the Peak Master now and get him to restrain the legacy disciples of Carnage Sword Peak so that they won't disturb you all the time. It's fine. Su Zimo waved it off and smiled. These people are quite interesting. I'm not really affected. Interesting? Bai Ming-shui blinked in confusion. Su Zimo smiled and explained, "The cultivation environment and atmosphere of the sword world are very good. You're lucky to be able to descend into the sword world after you ascended." Those words were indeed from the bottom of his heart. Although he had been cultivating in the heavenly world previously, he had read some records of the upper world. Most of the environments of the upper world were cruel and bloody. The strong were respected, and it was mostly survival of the fittest. Even the nine-firmament immortal domain of the heavenly world was the same. However, the sword world was clearly different. There were fewer schemes and plots in the sword world. They would not look down on somebody just because they came from the lower worlds. In the sword world, fairness was extremely important. Those sword cultivators could not even last a single round against him. In fact, many of them did not even have the chance to draw their swords. Although there was such a huge difference in combat strength between the two sides, the sword world had never thought of letting a perfected immortal of a higher cultivation realm come forward to suppress him. They did not let a couple of people attack him at the same time either. People of the sword world had to be fair in everything. Even for an outsider like him, as long as there was no deep hatred, these sword cultivators were unwilling to bully the weak with numbers. This was a spirit that the people of the sword world were willing to persevere and believe in. In the eyes of most people, that spirit might seem a little pedantic and naive. However, in Su Zimo's opinion, this was a civilization that was even more praiseworthy. Therefore, even though people from the sword world came to challenge him over the past 2 days, he did not go out and merely stopped once they were subdued. Right? Suddenly, Su Zimo recalled something. "I've observed some of the sword Daos of the sword cultivators of Carnage Sword Peak. They contain intense killing intent and should originate from the 3 great sword arts." What's the relationship between Carnage Sword Peak and the sword cultivator who created the 3 great sword arts back then? Bai Ming-shui nodded. That's a senior of the sword world. His name is Emperor Immortal Vanquishing. This Carnage Sword Peak was established because of him. The territory of the sword world was far inferior to the heavenly world as a whole. The mainland of Carnage Sword Peak was not even as vast as the divine firmament immortal domain. However, the strength and foundation of Carnage Sword Peak were not to be underestimated. Carnage Sword Peak focused in the Carnage Sword Dao. Su Zimo asked, "How's your cultivation of the heaven and earth slaying sword arts?" Back in Tianhuang mainland, Su Zimo had already imparted the 2 great sword arts to Bai Ming-shui. Bai Ming-shui released the 2 great sword arts in front of Su Zimo. Sensing the sword intent and killing intent contained within, Su Zimo nodded slightly. Bai Ming-shui's talent in the sword Dao was indeed shocking. All these years, even without his guidance, she had already cultivated the 2 great sword arts to greater mastery. It was also because Bai Ming-shui possessed 2 great sword arts that she came to Carnage Sword Peak after ascending to the sword world. In Carnage Sword Peak, she even had a chance to cultivate the human-slaying sword art. However, she was unable to fuse the 3 great sword arts into one and comprehend the Peerless divine power, Immortal Vanquishing Sword. Due to the death of Emperor Immortal Vanquishing, the ancient scrolls that recorded the 3 great sword arts were lost. Although the dermic formulations of the 3 great sword arts were passed down, the sword intent of Emperor Immortal Vanquishing could not be passed down. As for that sword intent, it was sealed in 3 ancient scrolls, which were the 3 sword arts in Su Zimo's hands. Only by witnessing and sensing the sword intent of the ancient scrolls with one's own eyes could they possibly fuse the 3 great sword arts. Su Zimo took out the ancient scrolls of the 3 great sword arts and handed it to Bai Ming-shui. "From today onwards, not only do you have to go to the waterfall of the sword cleansing pool to temper your body and bloodline, you have to continue cultivating the 3 great sword arts and comprehend the sword intent within." Bai Ming-shui's eyes lit up when she saw the 3 ancient scrolls. As a sword cultivator of the sword world, she naturally knew how valuable the 3 ancient scrolls were to her. "Thank you, Master." Bai Ming-shui received the 3 sword arts respectfully and began to cultivate in her cave abode. Although it was Su Zimo who imparted the Dao to Bai Ming-shui, in reality, He was comprehending the three great sword arts through Biming Shui's Carnage Sword Dao at the same time. Right now, he had already synthesized the three great sword arts and could create the embryonic form of an immortal vanquishing sword. However, he had yet to truly comprehend that peerless divine power. In the past few days at Carnage Sword Peak, Su Zimo had gained a lot while absorbing and refining the killing intent emitted by Carnage Sword Peak and comprehending the three sword arts. There was a high chance that he would completely synthesize the three sword arts and comprehend the immortal vanquishing sword at Carnage Sword Peak. A few days later, in the meeting hall of Carnage Sword Peak. Apart from Wang Dong, Gong Suanyu, Sword Immortal Tai Lai, Xin Yu, Qin Zhong, and Monk Zhu Jian, there were two more Peak Paradise Void-perfected immortals. One of them was dressed in black robes and exuded a cold aura. His face was thin and his eyes were sunken. This person's name was Li Shui, and he came from Fiend Sword Peak. The other had a cold and expressionless expression. His pitch-black eyes seemed to be incapable of viewing anything other than the sword in his hands. This was Yi Wuchen of Sever Sword Peak. The number one of Sever Sword Peak, who was also the number one beauty of the sword world, was Lin Xuanzhen. Yi Wuchen's sword was second only to Lin Xuanzhen in Sever Sword Peak. It was the same for most sword cultivators of Sever Sword Peak. They severed their emotions and desires and treated everyone coldly, as though they did not care about anyone. The Sword Dao of Sever Sword Peak and Fiend Sword Peak were both unorthodox and were definitely not inferior to the Carnage Sword Dao in terms of killing. For example, sword cultivators of Fiend Sword Peak would lose their rationality if they were possessed in their Sword Dao. Coupled with the treacherous and ferocious nature of the Fiend technique, it was difficult for them to hold back. The sword cultivators of Sever Sword Peak were even more terrifying. They cultivated the Sever Sword Dao and could enter a special state at any moment to sever their 7 emotions and 6 desires. The only thing remaining would be the sword in their hands and the blood of their opponents. Once sword cultivators of those 2 sword peaks attacked, it would be difficult for them to control themselves. Wang Dong was a little exasperated. To think that even your 2 sword peaks would be alarmed by this matter. Li Shui said indifferently, "If not for the fact that the sword cultivators of your sword peaks are incapable, we wouldn't have appeared. We can't let an outsider trample on the reputation of the sword world." Wang Dong wanted to say something but hesitated. He sighed and stood up worriedly, pacing back and forth in the hall. After he walked a few rounds, Yi Wuchen seemed to be annoyed. Suddenly, he spoke with a cold voice. "Can you stop? He's just an outsider. Is there a need for you to worry so much?" Wang Dong turned to look at Yi Wuchen and asked, "Do you think I'm worried about fellow Taoist Su?" "Then what are you worried about?" Yi Wuchen asked. Wang Dong said, "The cultivators of Sever Sword Peak and Fiend Sword Peak often don't know their limits. I'm worried that that person might unleash an even more domineering counterattack and injure the junior brothers of your sword peaks." Chapter 2746, Chapter 2746, Junior Brother Yun. Chapter 2746, Junior Brother Yun. When Li Shui heard that, he sneered. "Do you think he can injure the sword cultivators of Fiend Sword Peak? Once they become a fiend, their combat strength will increase by another level. In fact, they can even fight against celestial being perfected immortals." "You worry too much," Yi Wuchen said indifferently without even looking at Wang Dong, and could not be bothered to explain. The Sever Sword Peak was the leader of the 8 sword peaks in this generation, so Yi Wuchen naturally had the confidence. Right then, a few figures sped over from outside, panting with shock in their eyes. When Wang Dong saw the expressions of the sword cultivators, he could already guess the outcome and shook his head gently. "It's over." Li Shui frowned slightly and looked at the few sword cultivators of Carnage Sword Peak who had entered the hall. "Why didn't junior brother Fu Ying come with you guys?" Fu Ying was the sword cultivator chosen by Fiend Sword Peak to challenge Su Zimo. A sword cultivator coughed gently. "Senior brother Fu Ying lost." "What?" Suddenly, Li Shui stood up and shouted, "Impossible. Brotherly, don't be agitated. Calm down." Gong Suanyu persuaded hurriedly. let's clarify things first. Fiend Qi coiled around Li Shue's body, and he was a little frustrated. After a while, he gradually calmed down and glared at the sword cultivator. How did Fu Ying lose? How many rounds did the two of them fight in that intense battle? Tell me properly and don't miss any details. The sword cultivator hesitated for a moment and stammered. It can't be considered an intense battle. Senior brother Fu Ying was restrained by the other party in a single round. Huh? He lost in a single round? Li Shue clenched his fists and his gaze was bloodshot. Sword Qi burst forth from his body, and he became even more manic. Calm down, calm down. Wang Dong hurried forward and pressed Li Shue down, comforting him. It was the same for the junior brothers of the other sword peaks as well. Everyone merely lasted a single round or two. Gradually, Li Shue composed himself and retracted the sword Qi on his body. The sword cultivator glanced at Li Shue carefully and continued. After that, senior brother Fu Ying was so angry that he transformed into a fiend and ambushed the other party from behind. Fuck! When he heard that, Li Shue could no longer hold it in and scolded. That dog Fu Ying even dared to launch a sneak attack. He's completely disgraced Fiend Sword Peak. When Wang Dong, Gong Suanyu, and Qin Zhong heard that, they pouted as well. The other party had already let him off. To launch a sneak attack, because he was indignant, was the most despicable act in the sword world. Wang Dong coughed gently and explained for Fu Ying. Perhaps junior brother Fu Ying has lost his mind after turning into a fiend. It shouldn't be in his nature to ambush others. Li Shue couldn't care less about that. As he cursed, he charged out of the hall and grit his teeth. I'm going to teach that lad a lesson right now. Fuck, I'll make him remember this. I don't think there's a need. The sword cultivator coughed gently. Senior brother Fu Ying has already been taught a lesson by fellow Taoist Su. Huh? Li Shue was stunned and asked instinctively, is that Su fellow all right? In Li Shue's subconscious mind, if Fu Ying transformed into a fiend and launched a sneak attack from behind, that cultivator Su would definitely lose. Wang Dong comforted brotherly, don't be so anxious. Let junior brother Wang finish speaking first. Junior brother Wang continued, at that time, when senior brother Fu Ying transformed into a fiend and suddenly attacked from behind, many sword cultivators present could not react in time. The two of them were extremely close to one another, and there was no way to dodge. To think that fellow Taoist Su seemed to have eyes on his back. He did not even turn back and merely flicked his finger, colliding with senior brother Fu Ying's sword. Senior brother Fu Ying's destiny immortal sword shattered on the spot. Suddenly, the meeting hall fell silent. Although Wang Dong and the others had long predicted Su Zimo's strength, they were still shocked by this scene. The destiny spirit treasure of a sword cultivator was destroyed by a single finger flick. Even after Fu Ying transformed into a fiend, he could not last a single round. What level of power was that? What kind of physique was that? That single detail proved that this person's precise control of the situation, judgment, and reaction had already reached an extremely high level. Breaking Fu Ying's destiny spirit treasure could be considered an appropriate punishment for him. Even in Fiend Sword Peak, the matter of a sneak attack would not merely result in the destruction of a destiny spirit treasure. Suddenly, Qin Zhong asked, what grade is Fu Ying's destiny spirit treasure? It's a 7 tribulation spirit treasure, Li Shue said slowly. The corners of Wang Dong, Gong Suanyu, and the others' eyes twitched uncontrollably, and the hall fell silent once more. A moment later, a snort sounded in the hall. Yi Wuchen said indifferently, losing so badly despite an ambush in the fiend form. Fiend Sword Peak sure is capable. At the mention of that, Li Shue's face flushed red and he exploded instantly. Black sword Qi coiled around his body as he gritted his teeth and glared at Yi Wuchen fiercely. However, Fiend Sword Peak was the one who embarrassed themselves first after all. He could not say anything because they were in the wrong. Li Shue could only sneer. Yi Wuchen, there's no need for you to be sarcastic. Your Sever Sword Peak won't be able to gain anything from this person either. Yi Wuchen said expressionlessly, no matter how useless my Sever Sword Peak's Ding Lu is, as long as he's in the emotions sever state, it's impossible for him to not last a single round. Right then, junior brother Wang said weakly. Senior brother Ding of Sever Sword Peak did not last a single round either. Yi Wuchen's expression changed. Ever since he entered the hall, he had been expressionless, as though he was a person without any emotions. When he heard that, Yi Wuchen could not control his emotions. Ha 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 ha. Li Shui could not help but burst into laughter. The embarrassment and frustration from earlier on eased a lot. Yi Wuchen stood up and asked in a deep voice, Ding Lu did not manage to enter the emotions sever state? He did. Junior brother Wang nodded. However, after a single holler from fellow Taoist Su, senior brother Ding was dispelled from the state and was restrained by fellow Taoist Su. A single holler could dispel the emotions sever state? Li Shui retracted his smile and asked, This person came from the heavenly world. What divine powers and dermic arts did he reveal? Which immortal, Buddhist, or fiend Tao did he cultivate? I don't know. Junior brother Wang shook his head. From the moment fellow Taoist Su attacked until now, he hasn't used any divine powers, secret skills, or even weapons. The peak-perfected immortals of the 8 sword peaks were no longer as relaxed as before and had grim expressions. It was not good for them to let an outsider overturn the paragons of the 8 sword peaks. After a moment of silence, Wang Dong looked at Sword Immortal Tai Lai and said in a deep voice, Brother Tai Lai, looks like we can only invite junior brother Yun of your extreme sword peak out. Sword Immortal Tai Lai was helpless and smiled bitterly. Junior brother Yun is highly valued by Master in extreme sword peak. He's currently in seclusion to comprehend the immortal vanquishing sword. Unless necessary, Master won't allow us to disturb him at all. Qin Zhong stood up and shouted, This matter concerns the reputation of the sword world. Are you telling me that even if the 8 of us head to extreme sword peak together, we won't be able to get junior brother Yun out? I wish nothing more than to be able to attack personally. However, that Su Fellow's cultivation realm is too low. It'll be unfair if I were to attack. Sword Immortal Tai Lai pondered for a moment before nodding and saying, All right, we'll let junior brother Yun step in. Everyone, please follow me to Extreme Sword Peak. Chapter 2747, Chapter 2747 Famous. Chapter 2747 Famous. Extreme Sword Peak. A young man was in seclusion in his cave abode. A sharp sword surrounded by lightning floated on his left. The sword light was resplendent and sharp. On his right was a pitch-black and heavy sword that did not reveal any sharpness. In fact, the sword did not even have a sharp edge. The young man closed his eyes and circulated his bloodline. Sword chi vibrated, and the sword hum intensified. However, his aura became even more restrained, and not a single wisp of sword chi leaked out from his pores. He was like a heavy sword without an edge. Suddenly, the young man seemed to have sensed something and opened his eyes. A sharp glint flashed through his eyes before he regained clarity. Senior brothers, what's the matter? The young man was surprised, and his spirit consciousness detected that 8 sword cultivators had arrived outside his cave abode. According to his understanding, the 8 of them were among the top perfected immortal experts of the 8 sword peaks. However, the young man still did not stand up and merely asked through the cave abode. After a moment of silence outside the cave abode, Sword Immortal Tai Lai sent a voice transmission. Junior brother Yun, something has indeed happened at Carnage Sword Peak. We hope you can settle it. What is it? The young man did not seem interested and asked casually. Sword Immortal Tai Lai said, Junior brother, you should have heard of junior sister Baiming Shui, right? Her master has arrived in our sword world. Some junior brothers of the 8 sword peaks went to spar with him, but returned in massive defeat. Oh. The young man raised his brow slightly and his tone changed, as though he was interested. He knew that the battles in the sword world had always been fair. In other words, Baiming Shui's master was a convergence-perfected immortal like him. He can actually defeat all the convergence-perfected immortals of the 8 sword peaks. Interesting. The young man murmured softly. He had always loved to fight. However, in the sword world, no sword cultivator of the same cultivation realm was his match. causing him to be extremely vexed. Even if he wanted to challenge someone of a higher cultivation realm, the sword world would not allow it. He had heard that there was a sword Dao genius called Baiming Shui on Carnage Sword Peak who was also invincible among her peers. Unfortunately, there was no hope of her ever entering the Perfected One realm. The two of them had no chance to fight at all. He only wanted to cultivate to the Paradise Void realm as soon as possible and fight against Lin Xuanjin of Sever Sword Peak. When Wang Dong and the others saw that there was no sound in the cave abode, they thought that the young man was not interested. Suddenly, Sword Immortal Tai Lai said, "I heard that he's also from the heavenly world. Perhaps you might know him, junior brother Yun." Right then, the door to the cave abode opened. The young man walked out with two swords on his back and a playful smile. "I'll go over and take a look to see who from the heavenly world is here." Everyone heaved a sigh of relief when they saw that the young man was willing to step in. Sword Immortal Tai Lai smiled. "You're both from the heavenly world. Perhaps you might know him, junior brother Yun." "I might not recognize him." The young man shook his head gently and changed the topic proudly. "However, if he's from the heavenly world, he'll definitely have heard of my name." "Ha." Qin Zhong burst into laughter. "That's good. At that time, perhaps we might be able to have him back off without fighting just by revealing your name, junior brother Yun." Wang Dong nodded as well and smiled. "That way, our sword world can salvage some reputation." The young man said indifferently, "I hope that this person has the guts to fight me so that I can show what I've learned and fight to my heart's content." This time round, Wang Dong and the others were prepared to go with the young man. Apart from Wang Dong, no one else had seen Baiming Shui's master before. This was a good opportunity for them to witness this person's methods. "Have you heard?" Senior brother Wang and the others went to Extreme Sword Peak and invited that monster incarnate of Extreme Sword Peak out to deal with that Su fellow. "That's great. He's bound to lose if senior brother Yun steps in." "We can't be too sure. Those senior brothers previously were all arrogant, but in the end, they returned after suffering crushing defeats and lost all dignity. Junior brother Yun is different from them. The moment junior brother Yun entered the Perfected One realm, he fought against those senior brothers and defeated them almost effortlessly. With a few days of spreading, the matter of Carnage Sword Peak caused a huge commotion among the 8 sword peaks. Almost everyone was paying attention and discussing it. This matter was pushed to its climax the moment that monster incarnate of Extreme Sword Peak came out of seclusion. The sword cultivators of the 8 sword peaks, be it ordinary disciples or legacy disciples, moved when they heard the news and headed to Carnage Sword Peak to watch the battle and join in the fun. Instantly, Carnage Sword Peak became the center of the entire sword world. More and more sword cultivators gathered outside Baiming Shui's cave abode. At a single glance, the entire world was densely packed. With everyone crowding around, the young man arrived in front of the cave abode. A few sword cultivators could not hold it in any longer and knocked on the door. Before long, the door to the cave abode opened. Baiming Shui walked out and frowned. "Are you guys done with your daily challenges?" The young man had only heard of Baiming Shui's name before. This was the first time he was seeing her, and he was stunned. Wang Dong had an apologetic expression as he went forward and promised, "Junior sister Baiming, this matter has indeed gone a little overboard. Regardless of victory or defeat, today shall be the last battle." Baiming Shui said, "After I become a perfected immortal, if any of you want to fight, I will accede." Qin Zhong walked up proudly and said with a smile, "Junior sister Baiming, ask your master to come out. This junior brother Yun is also from the heavenly world. Who knows, the two of them might know each other." The young man looked at Baiming Shui and cupped his fists slightly, saying proudly, "Junior sister Baiming, I'm Yun Ting. Go and ask him if he's heard of my name." "Ah, it's fellow Taoist Yun Ting. You're indeed famous." Right then, a voice sounded from the cave abode. When he heard that voice, Yun Ting shuddered and his expression changed starkly. Was he hearing things? What the hell? Right then, a green-robed cultivator strode out and looked at Yun Ting, who was not far away, with a relaxed expression and a fake smile. In reality, Su Zimo did not expect to see Yun Ting in the sword world either. Back at the divine firmament meet, after Yun Ting was defeated, he handed the human-slaying sword art to him and left the heavenly world, his whereabouts unknown. To think that Yun Ting would come to the sword world. Furthermore, he had already condensed a Dao fruit in a short period of time and stepped into the perfected One realm, becoming a perfected immortal. He did not know what Yun Ting had experienced from the heavenly world to the sword world. However, it could be seen that he had benefited immensely and had indeed undergone a transformation. Su Zimo sized Yun Ting up. In the past, Yun Ting possessed an unsheathed sharpness, like the divine firmament sword behind him. Right now, although he was still sharp, Yun Ting could restrain that sharpness. It was like the other sword on his back. The heavy sword had no edge and was perfectly made. At that moment, Yun Ting already had the concept of returning to simplicity in the sword Dao. He was clearly stronger than when the two of them fought back then. Wang Dong and the others did not notice anything amiss. They thought that Yun Ting's name was so incredible that even Su Zimo was stunned. Qin Zhong grinned and shouted, "Su, since you've heard of junior brother Yun, do you dare to fight him?" Chapter 2748. Chapter 2748, He's my brother-in-law. Chapter 2748, He's my brother-in-law. When Yun Ting saw Su Zimo, his expression changed continuously. First, he was shocked and in disbelief. Then, he was pleasantly surprised and almost shouted. However, on second thought, he quickly calmed down. Su Zimo possessed the bloodline of the creation Green Lotus, and this matter caused him to be hunted for his life in the heavenly world. Right now, everyone thought that Su Zimo was dead. If he revealed Su Zimo's identity, who knew what changes would happen? In his heart, he naturally did not want to lose a powerful rival like Su Zimo. Su Zimo's existence was precisely the reason why he was constantly motivated to advance bravely in the sword Dao with indomitable will. Furthermore, he was certain that his sister would not want anything to happen to Su Zimo. Right then, Yun Ting heard Qin Zhong asking Su Zimo loudly if he dared to fight him. Su Zimo smiled gently and looked at Yun Ting, who was not far away. He nodded slightly. Actually, fellow Taoist Yun Ting and I. Oh no. Before Su Zimo could finish, Yun Ting interrupted hurriedly. Yun Ting could tell that Su Zimo wanted to say that they had fought before. If he said that, others would definitely be curious about the outcome of the battle between the two of them. There was no way he could hide the fact that he had lost twice in a row. After Yun Ting arrived at the sword world, he displayed his talent in the sword Dao to the fullest and was valued by countless seniors of the sword world. He could be said to be the center of attention. He could not afford the embarrassment if Su Zimo were to reveal in public that he had been defeated twice. Yun Ting's shout not only confused Su Zimo, but everyone else as well. Yun Ting jogged over to Su Zimo and shouted, "What a kooky coincidence. The two of us are deeply related." Initially, Su Zimo was going to talk about fighting. Who knew that Yun Ting would suddenly change the topic? Yun Ting looked at Wang Dong, Sword Immortal Tai Lai, and the others. He wrapped his arm around Su Zimo's shoulder and smiled. "This is my brother-in-law." Huh. Wang Dong, Sword Immortal Tai Lai, and the others were dumbfounded, and their jaws almost dropped to the ground. The surrounding sword cultivators who were watching and waiting to witness an unprecedented battle were stunned on the spot as well. Bai Mingxue frowned slightly. Suddenly, she turned around and glanced at Su Zimo before glaring at Yun Ting with an inexplicable hostility. Su Zimo frowned slightly, not knowing why Yun Ting had suddenly gone crazy. Just as he was about to speak, Yun Ting winked at him. "Brother Su, I've heard about everything from my sister." Yun Ting sent a voice transmission with his spirit consciousness. "You have the creation Green Lotus bloodline. It's best if you don't expose your identity." Su Zimo naturally knew about that and had no intention of revealing his identity in the first place. However, he did not know what his intention of hiding his identity had to do with Yun Ting coming over to claim that he was his brother-in-law. "Fellow Taoist Su is your brother-in-law?" Sword Immortal Tai Lai was still in disbelief. Wasn't this way too coincidental? Yun Ting said, "Of course. His name is Su Zhu, and he's in love with my sister. The two of us are very close as well." The corners of Su Zimo's mouth twitched at the mention of Su Zhu. Wasn't that name way too casual? It was obvious that it was merely a combination of his surname and Yun Zhu's name. Su Zimo did not say anything. In any case, he had never mentioned his name to anyone in the sword world. He would just let it be Su Zhu then. As for what Yun Ting said about him being in love with Yun Zhu, he merely took it that Yun Ting was just saying it casually and did not take it to heart. However, Bai Ming Xue narrowed her eyes slightly and looked at Yun Ting with a somewhat terrifying gaze. Wang Dong, Sword Immortal Tai Lai, and the others exchanged glances with awkward expressions. Who would have thought that after inviting Yun Ting out, there would be a family recognition scene instead of a shocking battle? Then, Sword Immortal Tai Lai probed, "Junior brother Yun, are you still going to fight fellow Daoist Su?" In the hearts of Wang Dong and the others, they still hoped that Yun Ting could defeat Su Zimo and save some face for the sword world. Yun Ting waved his hand and said self-righteously, "This is my brother-in-law. We're family. Why should we fight? Do you fight with your brother-in-laws for no reason as well?" Yun Ting's words made Sword Immortal Tai Lai choke. At that point, Su Zimo finally understood why Yun Ting would come over to acknowledge him as his brother-in-law. He was just saving himself some face. Sigh. The surrounding sword cultivators sighed with disappointed expressions. They had teleported over from the various sword peaks in anticipation of an unprecedented battle. To think that the two of them were relatives. The expectation of a huge battle came to nothing as well. Let's disperse, sigh. Seems like there's really no one among the convergence-perfected immortals of the 8 sword peaks who can restrain Su Zhu. That Su Zhu is really lucky to be able to become relatives with junior brother Yun and become a family. The sword cultivators of the 8 sword peaks discussed and dispersed. Wang Dong, Sword Immortal Tai Lai, and the others were still standing on the spot. Their minds were in a mess, and they felt indignant. "Senior brothers, if there's nothing else, I'll return to the cave abode with brother-in-law." Yun Ting cupped his fist slightly. "We haven't seen each other for a long time, and I'd like to have a good chat with him." "Junior brother Yun, please go ahead." Wang Dong and the others replied politely. "Brother-in-law, let's go." Yun Ting hugged Su Zimo and walked towards Bai Ming Xue's cave abode. For some unknown reason, ever since Yun Ting acknowledged Su Zimo as his brother-in-law, he felt a chill run down his spine. Yun Ting turned back and looked into Bai Ming Xue's cold eyes. He shuddered unconsciously. Arriving at the cave abode, the moment the three of them sat down, Yun Ting could not help but laugh. "Brother Su, this is great. To think that you're not dead. Back then, when I saw the message sent by my sister, I was sad for you for a long time. The sect master of the academy is fucking inhumane." Su Zimo could sense that Yun Ting was truly happy for him. Although the two of them had fought twice, there was no feud between them. Instead, they respected each other. Furthermore, Su Zimo had a good relationship with Yun Zhu. Right then, Bai Ming Xue suddenly asked, "Master, what's with the brother-in-law he mentioned?" "No, don't listen to his nonsense." Su Zimo smiled. "He just didn't want to spar with me and found an excuse for himself." "Oh." Bai Ming Xue nodded, as though she had a load off her mind. Yun Ting was unhappy when he heard that. He said hurriedly, "Hey, don't misunderstand. It's true that I called you brother-in-law because I didn't want to spar with you, but I'm not afraid of you. I'm sure you can tell that I've gained a lot in the sword world over the years. I was just thinking of finding someone to sharpen my sword Dao. You're the best candidate. However, I learned from my sister that you have the creation Green Lotus bloodline. If we had fought earlier on and you were wary and could not release your blood chi, you would not have been able to unleash your full strength. Even if I defeated you, it would have been an unfair victory." Chapter 2749, Chapter 2749 Infatuation. Chapter 2749 Infatuation. As he said that, Yun Ting glanced at Bai Ming Xue from the corner of his eye, as though he wanted to prove that he was not afraid of Su Zimo at all. However, Bai Ming Xue lowered her gaze and ignored him. Yuan-Ting coughed gently and puffed out his chest, saying proudly, "Brother Su, if you don't believe me, we'll head to a secret place to fight another day. You can do whatever you want, and we'll fight to our heart's content without holding back." Another day? Su Zimo smiled without saying anything. He believed that given Yuan-Ting's pride, he would not be afraid of him just because he had lost to him twice. But now, the difference between the two of them was even greater than back at the Divine Firmament Immortal Meet. Yuan-Ting had indeed improved in the Sword Dao. However, his Dao fruit condensed the profoundness of high-grade cultivation techniques of immortals, Buddhas, fiends, and demons. It even contained dermic Daos of a few taboo mystic classics, and he attracted the 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation before advancing to the perfected one realm. Even without using blood chi, the body of a grade 12 creation green lotus could take on a 9 tribulations pure yang spirit treasure head-on. To be precise, his green lotus true body was a 9 tribulations pure yang spirit treasure in itself. Furthermore, he was now in mastery of a few quasi-peerless divine powers. Right now, Su Zimo might only need to use 50% of his strength to suppress Yuan-Ting. After he met with the calamity this time round, he made a trip to the Death's Door and Yellow Springs Road of the Netherworld and revived in the Emperor's tomb. His gains were way too great. Until now, he had yet to fully digest and absorb everything. Currently, he had already removed the 2 curses in his body and was refining the energy that he had absorbed from the Emperor's tomb. The energy was significant enough. Once he refined it all, he would be able to break through and advance another level to reach the celestial being perfected one realm. The gap between him and Yuan-Ting would only increase. Back then, Su Zimo even regarded Yuan-Ting as his greatest opponent. But now, his ambitions were much greater. He was aiming for the 10,000 races and trichiliocosm, looking down on both past and present. What's wrong? When Yuan-Ting saw that Su Zimo was only smiling without saying anything, he could not help but raise his brows and ask provocatively, "Are you afraid?" Su Zimo smiled gently. "If you want to find an opponent to sharpen your sword Dao, there's indeed a suitable person who is beside me right now." "Who?" Yuan-Ting asked. Su Zimo looked at Baiming Shui, who was not far away. "Her?" Yuan-Ting could not believe it. Baiming Shui's talent in the Sword Dao was indeed not bad. However, she cultivated that martial Dao and was trapped in the Heaven Essence realm. She could not even condense a Dao fruit and was of no threat to him at all. There was a huge gap between the two of them. Su Zimo said, "Baiming is my eldest disciple. Of course, I'm not talking about now. When she becomes a perfected immortal, you guys can spar." "That's ridiculous." Yuan-Ting rolled his eyes. "Among those of the same cultivation realm, apart from you, who else can be my match? Furthermore, Su Zimo, you're looking down on me way too much. Although I view you as my greatest opponent, you're trying to send me away with a mere disciple of yours." Before Yuan-Ting could finish, he suddenly felt a chill. Not far away, Baiming Shui was looking at him with a calm expression and a cold gaze. Yuan-Ting hesitated for a moment and smiled awkwardly. "Junior sister Baiming, it's naturally not that I look down on you. However, our cultivation realms are different now, and we can't spar. If you have any questions about the Sword Dao later on, you can look for me. Su Zimo definitely can't compare to me in terms of the Sword Dao." Baiming Shui clenched her fists slowly and remained silent. She merely looked at Yuan-Ting deeply before getting up and walking out. "Junior sister Baiming, where are you going?" Yuan-Ting asked instinctively. Baiming Shui had an indifferent expression and left the cave abode without even looking at Yuan-Ting. Yuan-Ting turned back to look at Su Zimo and asked, "Did junior sister Baiming get angry? I didn't even say anything." Su Zimo smiled. "She's always been like this. It might not be targeted at you." "In that case, where is she going?" Yuan-Ting asked again. Su Zimo said in a deep voice, "Probably to cultivate." Actually, he could vaguely guess some of Baiming Shui's thoughts. Baiming Shui probably wanted to cultivate faster and strive to advance to the true martial realm as soon as possible to condense the true martial Dao body to fight Yuan-Ting. For some unknown reason, Su Zimo could vaguely sense that Bai Ming Shui seemed to be extremely hostile towards Yunting. This should be the first time the two of them met. Although Yunting was a little talkative, he should not have offended Bai Ming Shui in any way. Perhaps I'm imagining things. Su Zimo shook his head. Right then, Yunting suddenly leaned over and rubbed his palms with a hesitant expression. Brother Su, does your eldest disciple have a Tao companion? No. Su Zimo looked at the infatuated and sheepish Yunting with a fake smile. It was clear that he had seen through Yunting's thoughts. Sensing Su Zimo's gaze, Yunting knew that he could not hide it and no longer beat the bush. Brother Su, I've long seen through things between you and my sister. Don't worry, I'll definitely support you guys with all my might. I've been obsessed with the sword Tao all these years and have never had a Tao companion. Your eldest disciple is single as well. Why don't you help matchmake us? At that point, Yunting seemed to have suddenly thought of something and added hurriedly, however, there's one thing. The seniority between the two of us can't change even after I become Tao companions with her. What are you thinking? There's nothing between me and Yunzhu. Su Zimo was exasperated. As for what you said, it depends on Bai Ming's feelings. I won't interfere with her. That's nothing. Yunting said, you're her master. It's easy for you to arrange a marriage for her. When Su Zimo heard that, he said sternly, no matter who it is, be it her master or parents, no one can decide her fate and life. Bai Ming isn't a 3-year-old child. She has her own choice. In the ideology of Yunting and most of the others, they were still bound to the familial ties of letting parents make decisions for them. However, Su Zimo's growth experience was different from others. He was unwilling to impose his will on others. When Yunting saw how serious Su Zimo was, he changed his words and asked, in that case, you won't stop me from courting her? Su Zimo nodded. Yunting beamed. That's simple. If junior sister Bai Ming enters the perfected one realm, she can come spar with me. Yunting suddenly changed his mind and agreed. In his opinion, when the two of them fought, he would subdue Bai Ming Shui with the supreme sword Tao and reveal his peerless bearing. How could she not fall for him at that time? It did not matter even if Bai Ming Shui refused to admit defeat for the first time. If she was indignant, she would look for him to fight a second or third time. As time passed, the two of them would interact with one another for longer and longer. How could he not stand a chance by then? If Bai Ming Shui was still uninterested in him at that time, he would release his ultimate move and challenge Su Zimo. As long as he defeated Su Zimo, it would be enough to shock Bai Ming Shui immensely. Chapter 2750. Chapter 2750, Testing the Sword with You. Chapter 2750, Testing the Sword with You. Yunting smiled foolishly as he fantasized. However, he snapped back to his senses before long and sighed with a vexed expression. However, when can junior sister Bai Ming ever become a perfected immortal with that martial Tao that she's cultivating? What if I'm already an immortal king by the time junior sister Bai Ming advances to the perfected one realm? How can we compete at that time? At that thought, Yunting looked at Su Zimo resentfully. And you cultivated the immortal and Buddhist Taoist yourself, but let your eldest disciple cultivate that bullshit martial Tao. Su Zimo said indifferently, go back and prepare well. You won't be able to wait long for this battle. He had been paying attention to Bai Ming Shui's cultivation the entire time. During this period of time, with his help, Bai Ming Shui's physique and bloodline were reborn and her fate ring realm was infinitely close to perfected. Bai Ming Shui had a breakthrough in the cultivation of the 3 great sword arts as well. Right now, all she lacked was an opportunity to advance to the true martial realm. I hope so. Yunting sighed softly, still in disbelief. When Su Zimo saw that, he said meaningfully, Brother Yun, there's something I have to remind you of. My intention in arranging for Bai Ming to spar with you was not to matchmake the two of you or find an opponent for you. Then what was it for? Yunting asked. Su Zimo said slowly, when Bai Ming becomes a perfected immortal, she needs to find someone to test her sword and prove herself in the sword world. You're the most suitable person for that. In reality, Even Suzimo did not know how much Baiming Shue's sword Dao cultivation would increase after she entered the true martial realm. The best way was to find a suitable person for her to test her sword with. Yun Ting was that person. You want to use me to test her sword? The moment Yun Ting heard that, he exploded and sneered. You and your disciple look down on others too much. You've indeed defeated me twice, but you expect your disciple to do the same and even test her sword on me? From a certain perspective, Baiming is not my disciple. Suzimo said, she's the #1 successor of the martial Dao, and you're only her first obstacle in the martial Dao and the sword Dao. All right. Yun Ting sneered. I'd like to see how much of a surprise junior sister Baiming can give me. It won't be a surprise. Suzimo shook his head gently. When the time comes, just don't disappoint her. Yun Ting. Yun Ting was furious and gritted his teeth. Without saying a word, he turned around and left. If he continued talking to Suzimo, he was worried that he would not be able to hold it in and would attack Suzimo. The moment he left the cave abode, he saw Wang Dong and Sword Immortal Tai Lai standing side by side not far away, talking about something. When they saw Yun Ting appear, the two of them welcomed him. Junior brother Yun, did something happen? Wang Dong was very observant and asked when he saw Yun Ting's expression. They'll be fine. Yun Ting waved his hand and changed the topic. Senior brothers, what are you doing here? The two of them exchanged glances. Wang Dong said, Junior brother Yun, since you have a deep relationship with fellow Taoist Su Zhu, we're wondering if you can persuade him to not continue torturing junior sister Baiming. Even the 8 peak masters praised junior sister Baiming's talent in the sword Dao. We're worried that if she continues to cultivate like this, she'll be crippled. Crippled? When Yun Ting heard that, he was infuriated and mocked. How can she be crippled? The martial Dao is so incredibly powerful. When junior sister Baiming becomes a perfected immortal, even I won't be her match. Wang Dong and Sword Immortal Tai Lai were confused by Yun Ting's rebuttal. They did not know where Yun Ting's temper came from. Yun Ting said, I'm not going to persuade him. I want to see how junior sister Baiming can attract the perfected one heavenly tribulation and become a perfected immortal if she can't condense a Dao fruit. Well? Wang Dong and Sword Immortal Tai Lai exchanged glances. Wasn't Yun Ting chummy with his brother-in-law earlier on? Did they have a fight? Pausing for a moment, Yun Ting continued, in addition, senior brothers, it's better for you to restrain the sword cultivators of the various sword peaks. Don't bother having those of the same cultivation realm challenge him, lest they embarrass themselves. Even if those of the same cultivation realm gather in a formation, they might not be able to win him, let alone fight one-on-one. Peak of Carnage Sword Peak. This was the center of Carnage Sword Continent, and was also where the sword chi was the strongest. Without a grotto heaven cultivation, one could not stand on the peak of the mountain. At that moment, 8 cultivators were gathered at the peak of the mountain. They were either sitting or standing, sipping tea and chatting casually with relaxed expressions. Among the 8 of them, there were 7 men and a woman. They were the peak masters of the 8 sword peaks. The peak master of Sever Sword Peak, the only woman among the 8, looked at the figure who was swimming against the current and charging at the sword chi waterfall at the foot of Carnage Sword Peak and sighed gently with a pained expression. Baiming Shui has suffered a lot over the past few days. Ba. The peak master of Zen Sword Peak chanted a Buddhist proclamation softly. However, her physique and bloodline are clearly undergoing a metamorphosis. Although she's still unable to condense a Dao fruit, her combat strength is even stronger than before. There shouldn't be any disadvantages for Baiming Shui. The peak master of Carnage Sword Peak harumphed coldly. If that wasn't the case, I would have chased her master out of the sword world a long time ago. I wouldn't care even if I was criticized for it. Your temper's still the same as always. This chapter's initial release occurred on the N0V3LB1N site. The others smiled. The peak master of Extreme Sword Peak said, speaking of which, her master is from the heavenly world like Yun Ting. To think that he has such a relationship with Yun Ting. The peak master of Illusory Sword Peak frowned. I heard that Yun Ting's sister is one of the 4 great fairies of the heavenly world. I've never heard of her having a Tao companion. I'm not sure about that. The others shook their heads slightly. The heavenly world? The Peak Master of Fiend's Sword Peak pondered for a moment. I heard that a creation green lotus appeared in the heavenly world and condensed into a human body. It has already cultivated to grade 12. I've heard about that too. The Peak Master of Five Elements Sword Peak had a regretful expression. Unfortunately, that cultivator with the green lotus body was forced into the Emperor's tomb and died. How precious is a grade 12 creation green lotus? Even Emperor Immortal Vanquishing did not manage to nurture it back then. Sigh. The Peak Master of Tyrant Sword Peak said, "It's a pity for that paragon. He can only blame fate for playing tricks on him. If he was born in our sword world, he wouldn't have ended up like this." That's right. The Peak Master of Sever Sword Peak said, if he was born in the sword world, the experts of the 8 sword peaks would definitely protect him and allow him to grow smoothly, restoring the glory of Emperor Immortal Vanquishing back then. At the mention of Emperor Immortal Vanquishing, the few of them looked at the Peak Master of Carnage Sword Peak instinctively. After all, Carnage Sword Peak beneath them was established because of Emperor Immortal Vanquishing. At that moment, the Peak Master of Carnage Sword Peak looked at the withered lotus flowers growing on the peak with a conflicted expression and mixed emotions. On the mountain peak, the sword chi was violent and sharp. Even perfected immortals could not withstand it. However, the withered lotus flowers had been growing here the entire time, and it was a strange scene. The Peak Master of Carnage Sword Peak revealed a reminiscent expression and sighed heavily. These lotus flowers were personally planted by Emperor Immortal Vanquishing when he established Carnage Sword Peak back then. Unfortunately, after Emperor Immortal Vanquishing died and the creation green lotus shattered, the lotus flowers withered and never bloomed again. Chapter 2751. Chapter 2751 Breakthrough. Chapter 2751 Breakthrough. Ever since Yun Ting came out of seclusion and acknowledged a brother-in-law, this matter was left unsettled. Although Wang Dong and the others could not bear to see Bai Ming Shui suffer, they were helpless against Su Zimo, who was almost invincible at the Convergence realm. Everyone could only pray that Bai Ming Shui would back down and stop at the precipice. Bai Ming Shui was so talented in the Sword Dao that no one wanted to see her waste her precious time cultivating the martial Dao. In the blink of an eye, 3 years passed. For the past 3 years, Su Zimo had been staying in Bai Ming Shui's cave abode and had not left. The Convergence perfected immortals of the 8 sword peaks knew that they were no match for him, and no one came forward to challenge him. As such, he enjoyed peace. As he imparted the Dao to Bai Ming Shui, he maintained his cultivation. Finally, on this day, Su Zimo felt an opportunity to break through. In reality, the true essence in his body had already accumulated to its peak 2 years ago, and he was only waiting for a suitable opportunity. Bai Ming Shui sensed something at the side and snapped out of her cultivation state. She hurriedly activated the immortal formation in her cave abode. This immortal formation was set up by Su Zimo a year ago to prevent the traces of the Green Lotus bloodline from being leaked when he broke through. Su Zimo raised his head slowly and looked into the skies. There was only the thick stone wall of the cave abode above his head, and he could not see anything. However, Su Zimo's eyes seemed to be able to penetrate the layers of void and see the sky outside the cave abode and the firmaments of the sword world. A resplendent starry sky was vaguely reflected in those clear eyes. There was the galaxy hanging upside down, the flow of time, and the change of time and space. At that moment, Su Zimo's spirit seemed to have broken through layers of obstacles with the help of the power of the Tao fruit and was connected to the entire universe, resonating with it. In Su Zimo's consciousness, a sparkling fruit spun slowly with a powerful aura. Furthermore, as time passed, the aura continued to rise rapidly. At that moment, it was as though everything had vanished. Even Su Zimo's body vanished. There was only a sparkling and resplendent Tao fruit left in the vast world. The only difference in the dermic formulations of the immortal, Buddhist, and fiend Taoists were their natures, Tao hearts, and intents. However, the Dharmic Tao profundities were more or less the same. In the lower worlds, immortals, Buddhas, and fiends all had golden cores. This was the first time they broke free from the shackles of the world, and their lifespans increased to 500 years. After that, there would be heaven and earth Dharma characteristics. Among the Dharmic Taos of immortals, Buddhas, and fiends, the most important core was to comprehend the heaven and earth and communicate with it, establishing a connection with it. The heaven and earth Dharma characteristic was condensed using the heaven and earth powers. In the lower worlds, cultivators could only comprehend the minor Kilya cosms. After ascending to the upper world, cultivators could comprehend an even wider, more perfect and endless medium Kilya cosm. The so-called celestial being realm was for cultivators to resonate with the world through their Tao fruits. This chapter's initial release occurred on the N0V3LB1N site. The Tao fruit was the crystallization of the essence of the Dharmic Tao cultivated by cultivators. When that resonance was produced, it was equivalent to the recognition of this Tao fruit. The power of the Tao fruit would increase exponentially. At the same time, the immense power in the Tao fruit would feed back to the cultivator himself once more, allowing perfected immortals who had stepped into the celestial being realm to improve their bodies, bloodlines, and essence spirits greatly. The process of stepping into the celestial realm lasted for an entire day. Su Zimo's aura rose continuously as well. As immortal Queen Ling Long had expected, the grade 12 creation Green Lotus was not the end but only the starting point. The blood chi of the Green Lotus true body was still increasing, and there was no upper limit. His essence spirit cultivation had always been far ahead of his cultivation realm. After entering the heaven immortal realm, the Green Lotus essence spirit had already reached the Paradise Void Perfected One realm, which was the same as a perfected immortal. The Perfected One realm was divided into 4 minor realms. The reason why it was so clear and corresponded to different names was because there was a huge difference in strength between the 4 minor realms. Throughout history, it was extremely rare for paragons and monster incarnates to have essence spirits that were a minor realm above their cultivation realms. As for Su Zimo's Green Lotus essence spirit, it was 2 minor cultivation realms ahead of him. During the process of Su Zimo breaking through to the celestial being realm, he released a huge amount of true essence energy that filled Baiming Shui's cave abode. Furthermore, during the process of communicating with the world, the resonance was so strong that even the immortal formations set up in the cave abode could not withstand it, and cracks appeared. A wisp of the true essence aura of the Green Lotus true body leaked through the cracks. Right then, Su Zimo opened his eyes and took a deep breath, absorbing the essence chi that filled Baiming's cave abode like a whale swallowing a cow. Baiming Shui guarded Su Zimo the entire time without taking a half step away. For an entire day, she was lucky enough to witness Su Zimo's entire breakthrough. It was way too rare to see and feel it at such a close distance. The mysterious process of comprehending the heaven and earth and communicating with it deeply touched her. Su Zimo's breakthrough this time round was also a huge opportunity for Baiming Shui, allowing her to feel the opportunity to advance to the true martial realm. As for the wisp of true essence that leaked out of Baiming Shui's cave abode, it floated and fused into Carnage Sword Peak. On the peak of Carnage Sword Peak, the Peak Master of Carnage Sword Peak was resting with his eyes closed. Suddenly, as though he sensed something, he opened his eyes and his gaze landed on a few withered lotus flowers not far away. The expression of the Peak Master of Carnage Sword Peak changed and his gaze froze. At that moment, a few of the withered lotus flowers actually had traces of green life. Although there were still no flower buds growing, a few tender green spots appeared on the stems of the green lotuses and new lotus leaves appeared. What happened? Suddenly, the Peak Master of Carnage Sword Peak stood up and stared at the few green lotus flowers in surprise and joy. Right then, he sensed something and turned around abruptly. He looked in the direction of Baiming Shui's cave abode, and a resplendent sword beam burst forth from his eyes. The aura of the heavenly tribulation. Has Baiming Shui broken through? The heart of the Peak Master of Carnage Sword Peak skipped a beat with a look of disbelief. In their opinion, Bai Ming Shui had gone astray when she cultivated the martial Tao. Even if she cultivated that so-called level 9 fate ring and was strong among those of the same cultivation realm, she could never condense a Tao fruit and would never be able to advance to the perfected one realm. But now, the aura of the perfected one heavenly tribulation had already spread from Bai Ming Shui's side. She did it. After the shock, a look of ecstasy appeared in the eyes of the peak master of Carnage Sword Peak. No matter what, as long as Bai Ming Shui attracted the perfected one heavenly tribulation, she had a chance of becoming a perfected immortal. Furthermore, what made the peak master of Carnage Sword Peak even more excited was that he felt that he had found the reason for the revival of the lotus flowers. It had to be Bai Ming Shui. How could there be such a coincidence in the world? Bai Ming Shui had just broken through and was about to attract the perfected one heavenly tribulation when a few lotus flowers on the mountain peak revived. How impressive was it to have such a phenomenon accompany her when she broke through? According to the trend, after Bai Ming Shui's tribulation transcendence ended, the green lotuses on the mountain peak would probably awaken and bloom on Carnage Sword Peak once more. In fact, the peak master of Carnage Sword Peak suspected that Bai Ming Shui was the reincarnation of Emperor Immortal Vanquishing. Heaven's will. This must be Heaven's will. The peak master of Carnage Sword Peak muttered excitedly, "The heavens are blessing our sword world." Chapter 2752. Chapter 2752 Attention of Everyone. Chapter 2752 Attention of Everyone. 5 Elements Sword Peak. Suddenly, the peak master of 5 Elements Sword Peak reached out and plucked a ball of light from the void. The moment his spirit consciousness touched it, he received the information inside. Bai Ming Shui broke through and attracted the perfected one heavenly tribulation. The peak master of 5 Elements Sword Peak had a surprised expression. If not for the fact that the message came from the peak master of Carnage Sword Peak, he would not have believed it. The peak master of 5 Elements Sword Peak pondered for a moment and chose to announce the news. Cultivators who wanted to watch Bai Ming Shui undergo tribulation transcendence could head to Carnage Sword Peak. At the same time, the peak masters of the other 6 sword peaks received news from the peak master of Carnage Sword Peak. The martial Tao that Bai Ming Shui cultivates can also attract the perfected one heavenly tribulation. From what I know, the 9 fate rings that Bai Ming Shui cultivated seem to be unable to condense a Tao fruit, right? If she doesn't have a Tao fruit, how can she advance to the perfected one realm? From what I know, the 9 fate rings that Bai Ming Shui cultivated seem to be unable to condense a Tao fruit, right? If she doesn't have a Tao fruit, how can she advance to the perfected one realm? I'm not sure. However, since it's a message from Brother Liu, it shouldn't be wrong. Let's go take a look too. The other 7 peak masters of Sword Peak were doubtful and did not believe it. However, the 7 of them still chose to announce this matter. As for the other sword cultivators of the Sword Peaks, it was up to them if they wanted to head over and watch. Generally speaking, when sword cultivators of the sword world underwent the perfected one heavenly tribulation, other sword cultivators could watch from the side. However, if the heavenly tribulation was only at the 5th or 6th level, it would not be attractive to most sword cultivators. If he could reach the 7th level of the perfected one heavenly tribulation, it would attract many cultivators. For example, when Yun Ting underwent tribulation transcendence back then, the commotion was huge. Almost half of the perfected immortals of the 8 sword peaks came, and many sword cultivators who were in seclusion came out at the last minute. Have you heard? Bai Ming Shui of Carnage Sword Peak is about to undergo tribulation transcendence. Really? Her cultivation path is completely different from ours. I wonder which heavenly tribulation she can attract. She's so talented in the sword Tao. The heavenly tribulation probably won't be too weak. Not necessarily. That martial Tao she's cultivating was created by a cultivator of the lower worlds. How can it be compared to the dermic Taos of the immortal, Buddhist, and fiend Taos that have been passed down through the ages? In my opinion, she might not even be able to attract the 5th level of the perfected one heavenly tribulation. After the news spread, it caused a huge discussion among the 8 sword peaks. Firstly, Bai Shui was considered a celebrity among the 8 sword peaks, and many sword cultivators admired her secretly. Secondly, Bai Shui cultivated the martial Tao. Many sword cultivators were curious how many perfected one heavenly tribulations Bai Shui could attract after cultivating the martial Tao. Many cultivators moved one after another and headed to Carnage Sword Peak to take a look through the teleportation formations of their respective sword peaks. Yuan Ting broke out of seclusion right away as well. He looked in the direction of Carnage Sword Peak and harumphed when he recalled his deal with Su Zimo 3 years ago. Fortunately, I didn't have to wait long. I want to see how far your disciple can go. When junior sister Bai Ming's tribulation transcendence is over, I'll fight her and beat her until she's convinced. Humph, since you stole my sister, I'll steal your disciple as well and we'll be even. As he said that, Yuan Ting set off for the teleportation formation of Extreme Sword Peak as well. At the same time, Gong Suinyu, Sword Immortal Tai Lai, Yu Wuchen, Shin Yu, Li Shui, Qin Zhong, and Monk Zhu Jin arrived at Carnage Sword Peak one after another. At that moment, the surrounding 500 kilometers of Bai Shui's cave abode was classified as a forbidden ground. 10 Immortal King experts of Carnage Sword Peak left the mountain and guarded 10 spatial nodes in the surroundings, prohibiting anyone from entering to prevent any accidents from interfering with Bai Shui's tribulation transcendence. Thousands of miles away, the world was already filled with people. The perfected one heavenly tribulation had long begun. How's everything? Qin Zhong was the last to arrive. He looked at Wang Dong and the others and asked, "Which heavenly tribulation is it?" "It's the 3rd level right now," Wang Dong replied in a deep voice. He looked at the figure in the tribulation transcendence with a grim expression. Qin Zhong chuckled. To think that junior sister Bai Ming would be able to attract the perfected one heavenly tribulation even without condensing a Dao fruit. That master of hers was right after all. Wang Dong and the others did not say anything and looked at Bai Shui and the tribulation transcendence with strange expressions. Qin Zhong followed everyone's gaze and looked at the center of the tribulation transcendence. His expression could not help but change. At that moment, it was already the 9th heavenly tribulation of the 3rd level. A green sea of lightning had already formed around Bai Shui. It was blinding and stirred up massive waves with a terrifying might. As for Bai Shui, she stood on the spot the entire time without moving or even drawing her weapon. Well? Qin Zhong was secretly speechless and could not help but ask, "Junior sister Bai Ming actually underwent tribulation transcendence like that?" Wang Dong said, "Junior sister Bai Ming cultivates the martial Tao, and her physique is indeed strong. According to what I know, in the history of the 8 sword peaks, there were very few paragons who could withstand the first 3 perfected one heavenly tribulations with their bodies. Junior brother Yuan of Extreme Sword Peak was almost the peak of that. As everyone discussed, the 3rd heavenly tribulation had already ended, and the 4th heavenly tribulation descended. Bai Shui still did not defend and underwent tribulation transcendence with her body. This was Su Zimo's requirement for her. The martial Tao used itself as the world to cultivate continuously. The process of tribulation transcendence was also a form of cultivation, and it was a rare opportunity. This was the only way to release the full potential of her body and bloodline to the greatest extent. Boom, boom, boom. Amidst the exclamations of everyone, Bai Shui endured the first 4 heavenly tribulations head-on. Of course, it was not easy for her either. There were already some injuries on her body, and she was charred from the heavenly tribulations and looked a little disheveled. In the blink of an eye, the 5th level of the perfected one heavenly tribulation descended. Bai Shui had yet to release her divine powers, secret skills, or defend with her sword. Is junior sister Bai Ming crazy? Qin Zhong could not help but say, if she continues like this and is severely injured, how can she defend against the subsequent heavenly tribulations? Sword Immortal Tai Lai sighed as well. Previously, junior brother Yuan Ting almost died when he endured the 5th level of the perfected one heavenly tribulation with his body. Wang Dong and the others had nervous expressions and stared fixedly without saying a word. Boom, boom, boom. The 5th level of the perfected one heavenly tribulations smashed down one after another, and Bai Ming Shui gradually could not hold on any longer. Her flesh was lacerated by the power of the heavenly tribulation, and she bled profusely. She was knocked down time and time again and struggled to stand up. The ninth heavenly tribulation of the 5th level even pierced through her chest, revealing a bowl-sized hole that was extremely shocking. Finally, the 5th level of the perfected one heavenly tribulation dissipated. As for Bai Ming Shui, she laid motionless in the charred pit. At that moment, the hearts of all the sword cultivators tightened. Even the 8 peak masters on the peak of Carnage Sword Peak could not help but stand up and look over with nervous expressions. Isn't junior sister Bai Ming too hard on herself? Yun Ting was secretly speechless. Back when he transcended the 5th level of the perfected one heavenly tribulation, he also endured it head-on and almost died. Furthermore, that was with the fact that his physique and bloodline were strong to begin with. His bloodline was filled with the power of sword blood and lightning. Therefore, a portion of the power of the 5th level of the perfected one heavenly tribulation was absorbed by his body and bloodline, and he was lucky enough to survive. What did junior sister Bai Ming have to back her? That martial Dao? Right then, Bai Ming Shui's body moved and she crawled out of the huge pit slowly. Her face was pale, but she was expressionless with a firm gaze, as though she could not feel any pain. Her wound was filled with boundless life force, and the blood hole in her chest was healing rapidly. Chapter 2753. Chapter 2753 Myriad Sword Hum. Chapter 2753 Myriad Sword Hum. What a powerful life force! On the peak of Carnage Sword Peak, the peak masters could not help but exclaim when they saw that. This doesn't seem like Bai Ming Shui's own recovery ability. Someone must have sealed a huge amount of life force in her body in advance. Who can possess such a strong life force and seal it in another person's body? Even we can't do such a thing. The 8 peak masters exchanged glances. Instinctively, the gaze of the peak master of Carnage Sword Peak landed on the green-robed cultivator in the crowd, and he murmured, "Could it be him?" To be fair, the peak master of Carnage Sword Peak did not take this person from the heavenly world seriously at first. He was just a convergence-perfected immortal after all. Because he was worried that Bai Ming Shui would be dragged down by this person, the peak master of Carnage Sword Peak even looked down on him somewhat. However, when he saw that Bai Ming Shui had a chance of becoming a perfected immortal, the attitude of the peak master of Carnage Sword Peak towards this person gradually changed. At that moment, he even guessed that the person who sealed life force in Bai Ming Shui was Su Zhu. Of course, Su Zimo was the only one who had such methods. Su Zimo sighed gently when he saw Bai Ming Shui struggling to stand up. Although they both cultivated the martial Dao, Bai Ming Shui's physique and bloodline were way inferior to the martial Dao prime body. Firstly, the prime body was the founder of the martial Dao. Secondly, the martial spirit of the martial Dao prime body was a flame that tempered his flesh at all times. It could even smelt divine powers and secret skills and fuse them into his flesh. Thirdly, the two of them had different experiences. The body of the martial Dao prime body was not only made of flesh and blood, it was also a furnace that had smelted too many divine powers, secret skills, and taboo mystic classics. As for Bai Ming Shui's martial spirit, it was her sword. Bai Ming Shui's greatest advantage was in the sword Dao. In fact, Bai Ming Shui's physique and bloodline were inferior even when compared to the Green Lotus true body. Back when the Green Lotus true body underwent the tribulation transcendence, he stood on the spot motionlessly and endured the first 6 perfected one heavenly tribulations with his body unscathed. Furthermore, the Green Lotus true body possessed a terrifying self-healing power. Seeing that the 6th level of the perfected one heavenly tribulation was about to descend, Su Zimo shouted, "Bai Ming, draw your sword." He had once told Bai Ming Shui that the more heavenly tribulations she endured with her body, the more beneficial it would be for the cultivation of the martial Dao. However, at that moment, he saw that Bai Ming Shui had already reached her limit. If she continued to undergo tribulation transcendence with her body, there was a high chance that she would collapse in the 6th level of the perfected one heavenly tribulation. Bai Ming-Xue turned around and looked at Su Zimo from afar with a firm and unyielding gaze, shaking her head gently. This was her choice. Boom! The 6th level of the perfected one heavenly tribulation descended. Bai Ming-Xue stomped her feet and soared into the skies. Like an unsheathed sword, she shone with a cold glint and charged towards the heavenly tribulation in a bedazzling manner. Boom! Bai Ming-Xue collided with the heavenly tribulation and fell rapidly, landing heavily on the ground. She coughed out large mouthfuls of blood. However, she did not retreat, fear, or submit. Instead, she continued to charge forward with indomitable will. This was the martial Dao. This was Bai Ming-Xue's sword Dao. It was just like back in Baiming Town in Tianhuang mainland. Even though her dantian was shattered and her clansmen suffered and were bullied, she did not submit, admit defeat, or give up. No one could shake her will. The heavenly tribulation could penetrate her chest, but not her heart of the sword. At that moment, the 8 peak masters on the mountain peak were moved. Many sword cultivators in the world felt a shock that touched the depths of their souls, and their blood seemed to be burning. Many sword cultivators were convinced by her spirit of the sword Dao. Looking at the unyielding figure, they felt a long-lost feeling of gratitude and tears welled up in their eyes. This scene was familiar. It was the same way they watched Bai Ming-Xue go against the Sword Qi waterfall at the foot of Carnage Sword Peak, stubbornly. Boom, boom, boom. Bai Ming-Xue fell time and time again and landed on the ground before standing up again. Her body was already in tatters, and her original appearance could not be seen. However, she still did not give in and pressed forward. Boom! The 8th heavenly tribulation of the 6th level descended. The heavenly tribulation almost split Bai Ming-Xue into two. A gigantic wound slashed down diagonally from Bai Ming-Xue's shoulder blade, and her internal organs spilled all over the ground in a shocking manner. Bai Ming-Xue lay on her back in the huge pit, her body mangled and motionless, as though she was no longer breathing. The 9th heavenly tribulation of the 6th level was still being nurtured and could descend at any moment. Right then, all the sword cultivators held their breaths and focused. They looked at the figure in the pit and clenched their fists instinctively, hoping for a miracle. Suddenly, Bai Ming-Xue moved. Expressionless, she sat up slowly and placed her internal organs back into her body. The life force Su Zimo sealed in her body was almost depleted, and although her wounds were still healing, the speed had slowed down. Bai Ming-Xue pursed her lips and used all her strength to support her broken body bit by bit. Every time she moved, her body would tremble slightly, as though she was enduring immense pain. Finally, Bai Ming-Xue stood up once more and looked up at the firmaments. Her body was like a sword and her gaze was sharp as one. At that moment, many sword cultivators on Carnage Sword Continent could not help but cheer. Everyone was happy for Bai Ming-Xue from the bottom of their hearts and celebrated for her. The peak masters of the 8 sword peaks heaved a sigh of relief as well. However, at the same time, the 8 peak masters were worried that Bai Ming-Xue would not be able to survive the 9th heavenly tribulation of the 6th level if she continued. Buzz! Buzz! Right then, the sound of swords rang out from the direction of Myriad Sword Palace, reverberating through the world like the clash of metal. The 8 peak masters widened their eyes as though they had thought of something. Their hearts skipped a beat, and they revealed looks of disbelief as they looked over instinctively. This is hum of the sword steel, the 8 peak masters exclaimed. The moment those words spread, it caused a huge commotion in the crowd. The reason why Myriad Sword Palace was known as the center of the sword world and was surrounded by the 8 sword peaks was because there was a sword stele erected in Myriad Sword Palace called the Zenith Heaven Sword Stele. This Zenith Heaven Sword Stele was established by Great Emperor Zenith Heaven of the sword world in the past. It was engraved with the taboo mystic classic passed down by that great emperor. Ever since this Zenith Heaven Sword Stele was established, it had hummed a total of 2 times. The first time was when Great Emperor Zenith Heaven became a Great Emperor. He resonated with the Zenith Heaven sword steel and it hummed. The second time was when Emperor Immortal Vanquishing created the three great sword arts when he was an immortal king. The derivation of a peerless divine power resonated with the sword steel and it hummed. And now it was the third time. Bai Ming Xue did not create any divine powers or secret skills, nor did she advance to the Emperor realm. However, the martial will and sword Tao spirit that she had just revealed was recognized by the Zenith Heaven sword steel, and a hum was produced. Immediately after, the swords on the waists, backs, and even storage bags of all the sword cultivators of the 8 sword peaks and the entire sword world trembled involuntarily. The hum of the sword steel drew in a myriad sword hum. The Zenith Heaven sword steel was awakened by Bai Ming Xue and let out the sword hum to cheer her on. At that moment, Bai Ming Xue's aura reached its peak. Chapter 2754. Chapter 2754 Born for the Sword. Chapter 2754 Born for the Sword. After the sword hum sounded from the Zenith Heaven sword steel, a commotion and excitement sounded from the depths of Myriad Sword Palace, and a few terrifying auras were released inadvertently. On the peak of Carnage Sword Peak, the 8 peak masters looked in the direction of Myriad Sword Palace with smiles and gratified expressions. The other sword cultivators could not sense it yet, but the 8 of them could sense that the Emperor experts of Myriad Sword Palace were alarmed by the commotion here. Among them, a few old fellows even woke up. Generally speaking, sword cultivators of the sword world could only enter Myriad Sword Palace to continue cultivating after reaching the Emperor realm. To think that even those few would be alarmed? The peak master of 5 elements Sword Peak lamented. The Zenith Heaven sword steel has only hummed a total of 3 times. How can those few be indifferent towards it? The peak master of Fiend Sword Peak said. The peak master of Tyrant Sword Peak burst into laughter. These old fellows sure can hold it in. To think that they still can't let go of their pride as emperors and are still refusing to show themselves. Even if they don't appear, they will pay attention to Bai Ming Xue's Tribulation Transcendence in Myriad Sword Palace and protect her. Bai Ming Xue's Tribulation Transcendence this time round is truly the center of attention. Even I'm looking forward to how many levels of the heavenly tribulation she can attract. To be able to obtain the recognition of the Zenith Heaven sword steel, do you think she'll attract the 9 of Nine? The moment that was said, the hearts of the 8 peak masters skipped a beat and anticipation flashed through their eyes. The legendary 9 of Nine heavenly tribulation. They had lived for hundreds of thousands of years, but had never seen the appearance of the 9 of Nine heavenly tribulation. There was an emperor expert in Myriad Sword Palace, right now, who once attracted the 9 of Nine heavenly tribulation. However, that was millions of years ago. Even Lin Xuanjin and Yuan Ting, who were extremely talented in the sword Tao in this generation, only attracted the 8 of Nine heavenly tribulation. The peak master of Carnage Sword Peak said in a deep voice, "A few perfected 1 heavenly tribulations can't prove anything. Most of the emperor experts of the Trichilia Cosm merely reached the 7 and 8 of Nine previously. It would be best if Bai Ming Xue can attract the 9 of Nine heavenly tribulation. Even if it's only at the 8 of Nine heavenly tribulation, she's still the sword cultivator with the greatest potential in this generation of the sword world." The heavenly tribulation continued. A sword hum sounded from the Zenith Heaven sword steel, followed by the Myriad sword hum. Bai Ming Xue welcomed the 9th heavenly tribulation of the 6th level and slashed forward with indomitable will. In everyone's eyes, Bai Ming Xue's figure seemed to have vanished and was replaced by a sword that seemed to be able to penetrate everything. Boom! Under Bai Ming Xue's persistence, she managed to endure the first 6 perfected 1 heavenly tribulations head-on with her body in the end. With the power of the first 6 levels of the heavenly tribulations, her true martial Tao body was also rapidly reconstructed. The martial Tao runes mixed with the heavenly tribulation lightning fused into her body and bloodline continuously, stimulating the potential of her body. Without giving Bai Ming Xue much time to catch her breath, the 7th level of the perfected 1 heavenly tribulation arrived instantly. This time round, Bai Ming-Xue no longer chose to defend head-on. Instead, she released the divine powers and secret skills she had learned over the years to face the 7 of 9 heavenly tribulation. Boom, boom, boom. Under the destructive lightning, a figure that emitted endless sharpness charged against the lightning continuously and challenged the heavenly tribulation, displaying an unshakable will. The 7th level of the perfected one heavenly tribulation ended. However, the tribulation clouds in the sky had yet to dissipate. Unsurprisingly, the 8th level of the perfected one heavenly tribulation descended. This time round, Bai Ming-Xue summoned her destiny sword and revealed her comprehension of the sword Dao under countless gazes. Bai Ming-Xue's martial spirit was a sword. It was as if she was born for the sword Dao. To Bai Ming-Xue, there was no such thing as being one with the sword or being born with sword blood. Her existence was in itself a supreme, immortal sword that could slash through the world. Every single move and stance of hers matched her sword Dao perfectly. However, the 8 of 9 heavenly tribulation was way too powerful. Back then, Yun Ting almost died under the impact of the 8 of 9 heavenly tribulation. If Su Zimo had not arrived here and used the green Lotus bloodline to nourish Bai Ming-Xue's physique and bloodline for 3 years, she would not have been able to survive. She was struck down time and time again before standing up to face the heavenly tribulation. Finally, the 8 of 9 heavenly tribulation ended. Bai Ming-Xue lay on the ground, charred black. The surface of her body was cracked like the ground after a long drought, and she no longer looked human. Many sword cultivators heaved a sigh of relief. It was over. Wang Dong and the others heaved a sigh of relief as well. Although Bai Ming-Xue looked severely injured, it was clear that her body was still emitting life force. As long as she recuperated for a period of time, she would be able to recover. Wang Dong was concerned. Together with some sword cultivators of Carnage Sword Peak, he wanted to head forward to help Bai Ming-Xue up. However, the Immortal King experts guarding the surroundings had grim expressions and blocked any sword cultivators from advancing. On the mountain peak, the 8 peak masters looked at the firmaments above Bai Ming-Xue with grim expressions as well. Their spirit consciousnesses were strong, and they could sense it even more clearly. Although the tribulation clouds dissipated after the 8 of 9 heavenly tribulation, they were showing signs of gathering again and making a comeback. The heavenly tribulation was not over yet. The 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation. The 8 peak masters exchanged glances and thought of that possibility at the same time. At that moment, the sword cultivators of Carnage Sword Continent gradually noticed something amiss as well. They raised their heads one after another and looked at the tribulation clouds that condensed once more in the sky, exclaiming, "Heavens, could it be the 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation? That must be the case. Even though I'm already at the celestial being realm, I feel my heart skip a beat against the aura emitted by the tribulation clouds. The 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation is unprecedented. To think that I, Qin Zhong, would be lucky enough to see it in my life. Junior sister Bai Ming's condition is already very bad. Even the 8 of 9 heavenly tribulation is so difficult. How can she survive the 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation?" Wang Dong was worried. Throughout history, there were also some monster incarnates who were destroyed by the 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation and could not survive. In a flash, the peak master of Sever Sword Peak tore through the air. The other peak masters were confused and did not know why the peak master of Sever Sword Peak left in a sudden. Before long, the peak master of Sever Sword Peak appeared once more. The peak master of Sever Sword Peak pointed ahead and said in a deep voice, "The 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation is extremely rare in this world. You shouldn't want to miss it." Beside her was a peerlessly beautiful woman with a cold expression. It was the number 1 sword immortal among legacy disciples, Lin Xuanjin. "Master, what are you doing?" Lin Xuanjin asked indifferently. Initially, she was in seclusion. However, the peak master of Sever Sword Peak barged in and forcefully brought her here. The peak master of Sever Sword Peak pointed ahead and said in a deep voice, "The 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation is extremely rare in this world. You shouldn't want to miss it. Suddenly, Lin Xuanjin's heart skipped a beat. The 9 of 9 Heavenly Tribulation? She knew very well what the 9 of 9 Heavenly Tribulation stood for. It was said that a peerless divine power would descend with the 9th 9 of 9 Heavenly Tribulation. In theory, everyone who witnessed this peerless divine power personally had a chance of cultivating it successfully. Up till now, she had only cultivated the immortal vanquishing sword to the quasi-peerless level, and it had yet to reach the level of an actual peerless divine power. She had comprehended it for many years and felt that there was something missing. If she could witness the peerless divine power, the immortal vanquishing sword with her own eyes, she would definitely be able to comprehend its profundities and succeed. Of course, the prerequisite was that the peerless divine power that descended from the 9 of 9 Heavenly Tribulation was the immortal vanquishing sword.
BA4A12660039958A158C9 B7C3B3BB18796596509
Chapter 2755. Chapter 2755 A Sword of Frost. Chapter 2755 A Sword of Frost. I wonder what peerless divine power will descend? The Peak Master of Extreme Sword Peak murmured softly. The Peak Master of Sever Sword Peak said, peerless divine powers are extremely rare, and there have only been slightly more than 10 of them since ancient times. Baiming Shui cultivates the Sword Tao. As such, there's a high chance that the immortal vanquishing sword will descend. Baiming Shui? Lin Xuanjin murmured softly. She focused on cultivating the Sword Tao and rarely cared about the people and matters between the 8 sword peaks. As such, she was a little unfamiliar with that name. Lin Xuanjin seemed to have discovered something and frowned slightly. Suddenly, she asked, Junior Sister Baiming did not condense a Tao fruit. Why would a perfected 1 Heavenly Tribulation descend? The Peak Master of Sever Sword Peak said, it's said that Baiming Shui cultivates a dermic formulation called the Martial Tao that's different from the immortal, Buddhist, and Fiend Das. Martial Tao? Why have I never heard of it? Lin Xuanjin asked again. The Peak Master of Sever Sword Peak said, this Martial Tao was created by Baiming Shui's master in the lower worlds. This person is truly an anomaly. He took another path and created such a dermic Tao. To think that he could cultivate it to this extent. As the few of them spoke, the 9th level of the perfected 1 Heavenly Tribulation had already descended. The first 3 Heavenly Tribulations of the 9th level are similar to the previous 8 levels. However, their strength has increased significantly. If you want to survive them, you have to release your bloodline phenomenon. Baiming Shui stood on the spot, recalling everything Su Zimo had told her about the 9th level of the perfected 1 Heavenly Tribulation. Gradually, she tightened her grip on her sword with a determined gaze. Fight! Baiming Shui flicked her sword and hummed. The blood qi in her body surged and the sound of a tsunami sounded. Immediately after, a dragon's roar and elephants trumpeting sounded from her bloodline, shaking the world. This was the 9th transformation of the Martial Tao, the Dragon Elephant Force. Divine dragons circled and divine elephants appeared to protect Baiming Shui, colliding with the first Heavenly Tribulation of the 9th level with an earth-shaking bang. There were millions of people in Tianhuang mainland who cultivated the Martial Tao. However, no one could reach Baiming Shui's achievements in the Martial Tao. That was because at the beginning of Baiming Shui's cultivation of the Martial Tao, Su Zimo was the one who personally imparted the Tao to her, helping her build a perfect foundation. At the 6th transformation of the Martial Tao, one could condense a blood qi golden core. However, Su Zimo let Baiming Shui continue cultivating and only began to condense her martial spirit after cultivating the 9th transformation of the Martial Tao, the Dragon Elephant Force. If not for the firm foundation she had built back then, Baiming Shui would not have been able to survive the 9 of 9 Heavenly Tribulation now. The 2nd Heavenly Tribulation of the 9th level descended. The divine dragons and divine elephants were only phenomenons manifested by the martial Tao and not her bloodline phenomenon. They had already been destroyed by the first heavenly tribulation of the 9th level. Baiming Shui channeled her blood qi to its limits, and a dark and deep ocean appeared behind her, emitting a bone-chilling coldness. Baiming Shui released her bloodline phenomenon and endured the second heavenly tribulation of the 9th level head-on. Baiming Ocean was shattered by the heavenly tribulation and was almost dry. Baiming Shui spat out a mouthful of blood. Although more than half of the power of the heavenly tribulation had been resolved by Baiming Ocean, a portion of the terrifying heavenly tribulation still surged into her body. Before she could catch her breath, the third heavenly tribulation of the 9th level descended. Baiming Shui pursed her lips and endured the pain as she continued circulating her bloodline. A gigantic shadow appeared in the initially dry Baiming Ocean. Suddenly, the shadow broke out of the waters and charged towards the third heavenly tribulation of the 9th level. It was a gigantic creature that blotted out the skies in midair. It opened its gigantic mouth and emitted an ancient and terrifying aura. The Kurin race. Many sword cultivators recognized the origin of the gigantic creature and exclaimed, "Boom!" The third heavenly tribulation of the 9th level dissipated. Baiming Shui's bloodline phenomenon was shattered as well, and she coughed out large mouthfuls of blood. Her aura was weak, and she could no longer hold on. The fourth heavenly tribulation is called the bloodline tribulation and will directly affect your bloodline. Baiming Shui recalled what Su Zimo had said to her and tried her best to calm down to defend against the impact of the bloodline tribulation. Right in front of everyone, Baiming Shui's body trembled continuously and she curled up, as though she was enduring immense pain. As time passed, Baiming Shui's figure gradually faded and vanished strangely. What remained on the spot was a dark and deep sword. The sword emitted a strange power and no longer fought against the bloodline tribulation. Instead, it chose to devour it. This is, on the mountain peak, the expressions of the 8 peak masters on the sword peak changed with disbelief in their eyes. She comprehended a new sword Tao during the tribulation transcendence? That should be the case. However, this sword Tao coexists with her bloodline and is not perfect and stable enough. Before long, the bloodline tribulation ended. Baiming Shui's figure reappeared. After the fourth bloodline tribulation, not only did her injuries not worsen, they even healed by more than half and her condition was much better. No one knew how to defend against the 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation better than Su Zimo. That was because he had experienced it twice alone. He imparted his experience of the 2 tribulation transcendences to Baiming Shui entirely. The following essence spirit tribulation, Tao heart tribulation and karma tribulation did not pose much of a threat to Baiming Shui and were defended by her one after another. It was only when the 8th weapon tribulation descended that Baiming Shui suffered immense damage. Baiming Shui's body was drenched in blood and she swayed. She merely leaned on her destiny sword and stood in a pool of blood with difficulty. There was only one final perfected, one heavenly tribulation left. However, everyone knew that the final heavenly tribulation was the most terrifying and fatal. The pressure in the world became incomparably oppressive. On the mountain peak and in midair, all the sword cultivators held their breaths and stared fixedly at the tribulation clouds in the skies. The final heavenly tribulation was a peerless divine power, and they were lucky enough to witness it. This was also an opportunity for them. In fact, the few powerful auras in Myriad Sword Palace became extremely quiet, afraid of disturbing Baiming Shui. Only the Zenith Heaven Sword Steel was still emitting sword hums, seemingly boosting Baiming Shui's aura. Lin Xuanjin and Yunting were also looking forward to the next scene. Suddenly, peach blossoms of different colors floated down from the tribulation clouds in the sky. They were white, red, and pink and emitted a faint fragrance. The fragrance was not strong, but the surrounding sword cultivators felt a little dazed when they smelled it and looked intoxicated. Even most perfected immortal sword cultivators were not spared. Only the 8 peak masters on the mountain peak had solemn expressions. They could clearly see that although the peach blossoms looked ordinary, they were condensed from sword chi, and every single one of them contained terrifying lethality. If it's not the immortal vanquishing sword, what peerless divine power is it? This looks like a divine power of the sword Tao, but it doesn't seem to have appeared before. A new peerless divine power has descended. When the 8 peak masters thought of that, they were shocked. Right then, the peach blossom rain descended continuously and formed words in the sky. A sky of intoxicating flowers, a sword of frost. Everyone read it out instinctively. Zing! A sword hum sounded. Amidst the peach blossoms that filled the sky, a stunning and resplendent sword light appeared with an extremely sharp sword intent. Like lightning that tore through the night sky, it entered Bai Ming Xue's body instantly. Chapter 2756, Chapter 2756, Peerless Standoff. Chapter 2756, Peerless Standoff. The moment the sword light arrived, a torrential sword intent burst forth from within Bai Ming Xue's body, and the killing intent shook the entire world. A sword that was scarlet as blood flew out from Bai Ming Xue's body and took the sword light head-on. Immortal vanquishing sword. An exclamation sounded from the crowd. On the mountain peak, the 8 peak masters were astounded as well. Although the immortal vanquishing sword was not at the level of a peerless divine power, it was already a quasi-peerless divine power. Boom! The two sword Daos collided. A moment later, the tribulation clouds dissipated. The world was silent. All the sword cultivators, including the immortal kings present and the 8 peak masters on the peak of Carnage Sword Peak, were stunned on the spot, convinced by the sword intent revealed by that sword strike. There were no words that could describe the amazement of that strike. Perhaps everything could only be found in those words revealed. A sky of intoxicating flowers, a sword of frost. A new peerless divine power had descended upon the sword world because of Bai Ming Xue. On the mountain peak, Lin Xuanjin's calm eyes rippled as well, and her heart skipped a beat. Yun Ting clenched his fists with a conflicted expression. Although Bai Ming Xue attracted the 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation, that alone could not affect him much. The heavenly tribulation was only on the surface. Cultivators of the 8 of 9 heavenly tribulation might not lose to those of the 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation in the future. It was said that when the strongest emperor expert in the world, Demon Empress Blood Butterfly of the Great Wilderness, entered the perfected one realm, she only attracted the 5 of 9 heavenly tribulation. Generally speaking, after living beings condensed their Tao fruits, they could at least attract the 6 of 9 heavenly tribulation. However, Demon Empress Blood Butterfly was so weak back then that even the 6 of 9 heavenly tribulation did not appear. Even so, later on, she still stood at the peak of the upper world and looked down on all living beings. Yun Ting was only one perfected one heavenly tribulation beneath Bai Ming Xue that could not shake his Tao heart. However, when he saw the sword strike earlier on, he was still deeply shocked. He could not describe how terrifying that strike was. He only knew that if he was in Bai Ming Xue's shoes, he would most probably not be able to defend against that sword strike. Everyone's gazes were on Bai Ming Xue. She seemed to be in an extremely bad state. Not only was her life force weak, even her essence spirit and her consciousness was severely injured and was almost shattered. It's over. Sensing everything, many sword cultivators shook their heads and sighed. Yun Ting's eyes flashed with pity as well. Right then, a green figure flashed and arrived beside Bai Ming Xue was Su Zimo. Su Zimo went forward with a grim expression and carried the unconscious Bai Ming Xue, prepared to return to her cave abode. The next moment, the void at the side suddenly split open and an incomparably domineering aura descended. The peak master of Carnage Sword Peak had arrived. Put her down and hand her over to me. The peak master of Carnage Sword Peak stopped Su Zimo with a cold glint in his eyes and a powerful might that crushed towards Su Zimo. No. Su Zimo spoke slowly with a fearless expression. His tone was firm and unquestionable. Even against an immortal king expert, Su Zimo met his gaze without dodging at all. The jaws of the surrounding sword cultivators dropped slightly. At that moment, everyone seemed to have an illusion that Su Zimo was not at a disadvantage in terms of aura in his confrontation with the peak master of Carnage Sword Peak. Who's that? On the mountain peak, Lin Xuanjin's gaze landed on Su Zimo, and she suddenly asked. The peak master of Sever Sword Peak said, "He's Baiming Xue's master in the lower world." Lin Xuanjin nodded slightly. Sigh. Suddenly, the peak master of 5 Elements Sword Peak sighed. Brother Lu is a little worked up because he's overly concerned. Baiming Xue is so severely injured that even her essence spirit is almost shattered. Even the emperors of Myriad Sword Palace can't do anything for her, let alone us. The peak master of Illusory Sword Peak nodded as well. If they could save her, those old fellows would have appeared a long time ago. Ba. The peak master of Zen Sword Peak said, "We should step in to talk to Brother Lu lest he injures Baiming Xue's master in a moment of impulse. After all, this has nothing to do with her master." What did you say? When the peak master of Carnage Sword Peak saw that Su Zimo actually dared to oppose him, he could not help but feel enraged. The sword light in his eyes became even sharper and was about to spew out. "Can you save her?" Su Zimo asked instead with a calm expression. The peak master of Carnage Sword Peak was stumped for words and was stunned on the spot. Indeed, he could not save Baiming Xue. However, he truly did not want her to die prematurely. He had to give it a try with everything he could no matter what. "Since you can't save her, don't block the way." Right then, Su Zimo said, "I'll save my own disciple. No one else is to disturb me for a month." With that said, Su Zimo carried Baiming Xue towards the cave abode. When he heard that, the peak master of Carnage Sword Peak could not believe it. However, a trace of hope reignited in his heart, and he moved aside instinctively. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo carried Baiming Xue and disappeared from everyone's sight. The peak master of Carnage Sword Peak stood on the spot with a conflicted expression. After pondering for a long time, he took a deep look in the direction where Su Zimo and Baiming Xue left before turning to leave. On the mountain peak, Lin Xuanjin had already left and returned to Sever Sword Peak to continue her seclusion. Although she did not see the descent of the immortal vanquishing sword this time round, that new peerless divine power still shocked her greatly. She wanted to enter seclusion as soon as possible to absorb and refine her comprehension as much as possible. "Brother Lu, let's let him give it a shot." The peak master of 5 Elements Sword Peak sighed. "Even if you take Baiming Xue away, you'll probably have to watch her die in front of you in the end." The peak master of Sever Sword Peak said, "That's right. Even if he can't save her, Baiming Xue is still his disciple. He should be the one to send her off on her final journey." The peak master of Carnage Sword Peak was silent. He looked at Baiming Xue's cave abode from afar with a hint of anticipation. Upon returning to the cave abode, Su Zimo activated the surrounding immortal formations immediately and blocked the entire cave abode. Along the way, he had already checked Baiming Xue's injuries from head to toe. Baiming Xue was indeed severely injured, and her life was on the line. The most terrifying thing was that Baiming Xue's essence spirit, which was the sword soul in her consciousness, suffered a huge impact and was almost shattered. However, Su Zimo could see clearly that the final sword strike of the 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation was not fatal. In fact, it left Baiming Xue with a trace of life. This was completely different from the 2 tribulation transcendences he underwent back then. Back when he attracted the 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation twice, the final heavenly tribulations were completely aimed at destroying him. However, when the sword light from the peerless divine power of the sword Tao entered Baiming Xue's body at the last moment, it left a trace of life to save her life temporarily. As long as there was a trace of life, Su Zimo had a way to save Baiming Xue. Relying on the bloodline of the grade 12 creation Green Lotus, if he used the Lotus Life Finger for a month, he could heal Baiming Xue's injuries completely. As for the sword soul injuries that were the most difficult to resolve, He had some sakura fruits in his storage bag that he could feed her. If one won't do, he would use two. If he chanted the text from the Prajna Nirvana Sutra at the same time to nourish Baiming Xue's sword soul, there was a 70% chance he could heal her completely. The grade 12 creation green lotus that possessed an incomparably rich life force was the only possibility of saving Baiming Xue, who was on the brink of death. Upon recovering, Baiming Xue had a chance of comprehending two peerless divine powers. Chapter 2757, Chapter 2757, Return of the Sword Arts. Chapter 2757, Return of the Sword Arts. After the 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation dissipated, many sword cultivators returned to their respective sword peaks. This observation allowed most sword cultivators to gain many new insights into the sword Tao. If anyone in the world could attract the 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation, it would be a rare opportunity for the cultivators of the entire world. On the peak of Carnage Sword Peak, the 8 peak masters gathered here and recalled the scene of Baiming Xue undergoing tribulation transcendence earlier on. They sighed endlessly. If I'm not wrong, Baiming Xue should have the original ancient scrolls of the 3 great sword arts in her storage bag, the peak master of Sever Sword Peak said in a deep voice. The others were not surprised when they heard that. The 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation was way too powerful. Not only was Baiming Xue's body severely injured, her storage bag was almost shattered as well. Through the shattered storage bag, the 8 peak masters sensed the auras of the 3 sword arts. Furthermore, it was the most primitive and purest sword chi of the 3 great sword arts. The peak master of 5 elements Sword Peak nodded as well. Although her immortal vanquishing sword has yet to reach the level of a peerless divine power, it's at the quasi-peerless level. There's no mistake about that divine charm and sword intent she possessed. The peak master of Carnage Sword Peak said, I've been paying attention to her cultivation. At the very least, she was still unable to fuse the 3 great sword arts and condense the immortal vanquishing sword 3 years ago. The reason why she could cultivate the immortal vanquishing sword should be because she read the original ancient scrolls of the 3 great sword arts. The peak master of Illusory Sword Peak lamented, Baiming Xue is truly blessed. To think that she could obtain the first version of the 3 great sword arts. The peak master of Carnage Sword Peak had a puzzled expression. However, she has been cultivating in Carnage Sword Peak for the past 3 years and has never left. How could she have obtained the 3 sword arts? 3 years ago, the peak masters of the 8 sword peaks exchanged glances and thought of the same person at the same time. 3 years ago was when Su Zhu of the heavenly world arrived. Could he have imparted it to Baiming Xue? In that case, he should have cultivated the 3 great sword arts as well. To be able to impart the first version of the 3 great sword arts to Baiming Xue, it's clear that he values her immensely. Even personal disciples might not be able to see the first versions of cultivation techniques like the 3 great sword arts. Furthermore, Su Zimo handed the first version of the 3 great sword arts to Baiming Xue right away. And no matter what, the first version of the 3 great sword arts has been lost for many years. It's finally back in the hands of a cultivator of the sword world in this generation. If Su Zhu really imparted the 3 great sword arts to Baiming Xue, brother Lu, you should meet him and thank him in person. The significance of the return of the 3 great sword arts to the sword world is way too great. In reality, the peak master of Carnage Sword Peak knew the importance of this matter as well. However, he was an immortal king after all, and Su Zhu was only a perfected immortal. He was still a little prideful and resistant to the idea of that. Furthermore, Baiming Xue's fate was unknown. Even if the 3 great sword arts were returned, he was not in the mood. The peak master of Carnage Sword Peak said, that's all speculation. If the 3 great sword arts were really imparted to Baiming Xue by this person, it's nothing for me to thank him. If he can save Baiming Xue, it won't even be a problem for me to prepare a huge gift and hand it to him personally, let alone thank him. This was a monster incarnate of the Sword Tao who attracted the 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation and brought about the birth of a new peerless divine power. As long as she could survive, she would definitely be the hope of the sword world in the future. That was something that no gift could be exchanged for. Time flew, and in the blink of an eye, a month had passed. During this period of time, almost all the sword cultivators of the 8 sword peaks were discussing the previous 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation. Wang Dong and the other sword cultivators of Carnage Sword Peak took turns to stand guard outside Bai Ming Xue's cave abode every day, hoping for some news to come from inside. However, the cave abode was closed the entire time, and it was silent inside. Although the Peak Master of Carnage Sword Peak did not appear, he would look in that direction from time to time. On this day, the door of the cave abode that had been closed for a month opened slowly, and a slender figure walked out from the depths of the cave abode. The sword cultivators guarding outside the cave abode looked over immediately, and their eyes widened in shock when they saw the figure walking out. Bai Ming Xue was out of seclusion. The news swept through the 8 sword peaks like a violent storm, causing a huge commotion. Everyone saw Bai Ming Xue's injuries that day. Even Immortal King experts were helpless. No one expected Bai Ming Xue to come back to life and recover fully. When Wang Dong and the others received the news, they came to congratulate her immediately. Bai Ming Xue's advancement to the perfected One Realm meant that she had already become a legacy disciple of the sword world Heektham. On the mountain peak, Lu Yun, the peak master of Carnage Sword Peak, burst into laughter excitedly. Ha 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 ha, the heavens are truly blessing our sword world. Lu Yun looked at the withered lotus flowers on the mountain peak and murmured, Senior Immortal Vanquishing, did you see that? Our sword world now has a monster incarnate who attracted the 9 of 9 heavenly tribulation. Bai Ming Xue's tribulation transcendence had already ended. However, the withered lotus flowers on the mountain peak did not recover their vitality as he had expected. Even so, Lu Yun was delighted when he saw Bai Ming Xue return unscathed. At the same time, the peak masters of the other sword peaks received the news as well. Seems like Carnage Sword Peak is going to rise in this generation. With the appearance of Bai Ming Xue from Carnage Sword Peak and the return of the 3 great sword arts to the sword world, Lu Yun will probably wake up laughing in his dreams. That might not be the case. In this generation, Extreme Sword Peak has Yun Ting and Sever Sword Peak has Lin Xuanjun. It's still unknown who can walk further on the Sword Dao. Among the legacy disciples of the 8 sword peaks, Bai Ming Xue, Yun Ting, and Lin Xuanjun have all cultivated the immortal vanquishing sword to the level of a quasi-peerless divine power. I wonder who will be the first to comprehend the true immortal vanquishing sword. Although Bai Ming Xue had obtained the peerless divine power of a sword of frost, it did not mean that she had completely comprehended it. Comprehending and mastering a peerless divine power was as difficult as ascending the heavens. Bai Ming Xue still had to continue cultivating and comprehending. She needed time to settle down and an opportunity. It could only be said that she was the sword cultivator with the highest chance of comprehending a sword of frost. On the mountain peak, Lu Yun looked at Bai Ming Xue, who had just walked out of her cave abode and was receiving the congratulations of many sword cultivators in silence. A moment later, he suddenly sent a voice transmission with his spirit consciousness, asking Bai Ming Xue to come to the peak of Carnage Sword Peak. Firstly, he wanted to test if Bai Ming Xue could revive the lotus flowers on the mountain peak. Secondly, he had to ask about the matter of the 3 great sword arts. Before long, Bai Ming Xue ascended the peak of Carnage Sword Peak. This was the first time she was here. A hint of surprise flashed through her eyes as she looked at the large patch of withered lotus flowers around her. Disappointment flashed through Lu Yun's eyes. There was no feedback from the surrounding lotus flowers. Lu Yun put that matter aside for the time being and asked with a smile, Bai Ming Xue, there's something I want to confirm. Did your master impart the 3 great sword arts to you? At the mention of the 3 great sword arts and Su Zimo, Bai Ming Xue suddenly looked wary. Lu Yun smiled. Don't be nervous. Since the 3 great sword arts are with you, they belong to you. No one can take them away without your permission. As for your master, I won't hurt him either. In fact, if he was the one who imparted the 3 great sword arts to you, I'll have to prepare a gift to thank him in person. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.